here's some items. So you guys can do a quick big 5 on yourselves. And I'll tell you the upside and downside of it. So, if you're orderly, you follow a schedule. How many of you follow a schedule? Okay. And how many of you don't? Okay, so one thing I would recommend is that you do. And I'll tell you why. Like, intelligence is a very good predictor of academic performance. And there's not a lot you can do about your intelligence. I mean, you can squander it, but it's very difficult to improve it. Conscientiousness, well, it's a trait too, so it's hard to work on, but we know that conscientious people get better grades. And it's reliable, and it's a powerful effect. And so, if your time use is organized, then the probability that you're going to be successful is very high. So, one of the things you might think about is make friends with a calendar, like Google Calendar or something like that. And I can tell you some tricks about that, because really it is important. Like, and I'm not kidding around about this. If you're low in conscientiousness, it's really going to trip you up as you walk through life. There's not very many advantages to it that I've been able to see. And I'm not assuming that just because you don't follow a schedule, you're low in conscientiousness, but it is one of the items that mark it. The advantage I've seen so far to being unconscientious is that if you become unemployed, it doesn't bother you as much. And I mean, that actually turns out to matter in some situations. So like, you know, if a big company has to shed 50% of its employees, it's the conscientious people are going to suffer themselves to death for it. And the unconscientious people, they're not going to care anyways, because they weren't working anyways. So it doesn't matter if they have a job or not. So here's one way of thinking about making use of a schedule. Often people are afraid of schedules because they think of them as a trap. You know, you make a schedule and it's like this little prison that you have to live inside. And, you know, and all you're doing in your schedule is putting down things you have to do or should do. And so, you know, there's not a lot of fun in that. And so not only is it a trap or a prison, but it's kind of an unpleasant one. But a way to work with the schedule in a lot more sophisticated way is to think, well, I'm going to plan the next week, say, because you plan it day by day, but we'll take the week as the unit level of analysis and think, well, I'd like to plan a week I'd like to have. And then your schedule all of a sudden becomes a tool for increasing the quality of your life. And that's a whole different issue, you know, because you might think, what's the emotion that you suffer, assuming you suffer one of these emotions? If you have an essay that's due and you're not doing it, like, would you regard that as a pleasant emotion or unpleasant emotion? Okay, so do you think you can characterize the unpleasantness? Like, what kind of emotion is it? It's guilt. Okay, anything else? Frustration? Yeah, so you're sort of frustrated with yourself. Yeah, you need a slap, right? You think, I need a slap. So, okay, so guilt, anything else? Anxiety? Restlessness? So that's kind of an agitation. Yeah, it's because your body knows you should be doing something, but you know, you're not pointing it in the right direction, so it's shame? Is that reasonable? So, okay, so the reason I was asking you about that is because, you know, most of the negative emotions are associated with neuroticism, but some of them seem to be associated with conscientiousness. And the conscientious negative emotions seem to be guilt and shame, fundamentally. And so recent research, and really recent, I only got this paper like a week ago, I think it's about 4 months old, seem to indicate that conscientious people feel less guilt, but they're more guilt prone. So if they don't do something, that makes them guilty, but they organize their time so they are doing the things they're supposed to do, so then they don't feel guilty. So anyways, back to the schedule. So, all right, you think about your week and you think about your day, and you think, well, how would you improve the quality of a given day or a given week? Well, one of the ways of improving it is to not put yourself into the situation where there are things hanging over your head that you have to feel guilty and ashamed about, because that's a very unpleasant way of being. And, you know, if you have an essay that's due in a week and you're procrastinating, then the fact that you have to do that essay can ruin the whole week. And even when you're doing something that's positive, hypothetically, it's kind of that horrible kind of positive that you experience when you know that you should be doing something else. And so that's when you end up watching YouTube videos about like dancing cats or something like that. You know, and it's at best it's a guilty pleasure. it's not a pleasure at all. You think, like, what the hell am I doing watching videos of dancing cats, you know? But then you know that you're procrastinating, and that's low quality, very low quality existence. So if you use your schedule, you can think, okay, well, here's some times that I'm going to do this work. And then you can also sort of ask yourself about that when you're designing your schedule. Because you don't want to design a schedule like you're Adolf Hitler telling yourself what to do, you know, because you're not going to comply with it then. What you have to do if you're going to design a schedule is you have to ask yourself, all right, I'm going to set aside some time to study over the next week or to do this essay or whatever it is. How much time would I actually spend studying? An hour or two a day might be a worthwhile thing to schedule in, and I would say don't schedule in more than that to begin with, because then you'll fail and then you'll stop using the schedule. And so the other thing you want to do is you want to schedule in things that you want to do, and then you want to look at the day or the week and you want to think, hey, that's a week I'd like to have. If I had a week like that, it would be good. You know, I'd be caught up so that all that negative emotion doesn't have to accrue. And I would have done a bunch of things that I'm interested in doing, and at the end of the week I'd be in better shape than I was at the beginning. And if you treat a schedule like that, so that what you're using it is to design the days and weeks that you want to have, instead of using it as this little, you know, jail that you have to put yourself in that you're not going to do anyways, then you can learn to use them. And that's one thing you can do to make yourself more industrious, more conscientious. Follow a schedule. I've told people to learn to use a schedule, and people often hate schedules because they act as their own tyrants, right? They say, well, you have to do this unpleasant thing, and then here's another unpleasant thing you have to do, and then you have to do this unpleasant thing, and you do that for about 3 days, and you think, to hell with this, I'm not doing that, you know, and you fall off the wagon. That isn't what you're supposed to do with a schedule. You're supposed to use it to design the days that you would like to have if you were taking care of yourself. And so some of that is, you know, you wake up in the morning and you think, here's 5 things I have to do that if I don't do, my life will be worse. It's like paying bills, for example, or taking out the garbage. It's like you have to do those because otherwise things degenerate. So you got to put some of those in the schedule, because otherwise tomorrow is worse than today, and that's a bad trajectory. But you also want to build in things, you know, you've got to act in some sense like you're dealing with a relatively recalcitrant 9-year-old. It's like, so, well, here's some things you have to do, but here's some things that if you do, you could reward yourself with. And if you get the balance there between obligation and reward right, then you'll find that you're motivated to do the things. And that's what you want to do. You want to do that so it's sustainable across days and weeks and months. And so you got to treat yourself like a good boss would treat a valued employee, and not like a tyrant would treat a slave, because the slave will rebel. And, you know, people say, well, I don't follow through on my plans. It's like, well, A, they're probably not very well formulated, and maybe you're doing them because of an external moral obligation or something. They're not really your plans, right? And B, you're acting like a tyrant and a slave, and that's a bad relationship to have with yourself. Treat other people as you would like to be treated. It works both ways. You also treat yourself like you treat other people properly. So that's a necessary thing, and often people don't do that. But the scheduling is really important.
What steps should someone take to start developing delayed gratification when they constantly give in to instant gratification?
Well, okay, imagine, I know the answer to this to some real degree, because I had graduate students in particular who I picked because they were very smart and often very creative, but sometimes they weren't very conscientious. So they had a hard time delaying gratification. And so, well, I would say, if you would like to discipline yourself, which is a very good idea, you need to pick a direction. Pick a direction you want to go first. Pick a goal you would like to attain, and a medium to long-term goal. You might imagine something you need and want, some attainment that would motivate, whose pursuit would motivate you. And you can ask yourself that. It's a good question to ask yourself in general, you know. This is a very good question to ask yourself, is if you could have what you needed and wanted, what would that be? And that's a meditative question. You don't want to force an answer out of yourself. You want to ask yourself that like you would ask someone else. If I could have what I wanted, what would that look like? And you can ask yourself that in a more differentiated way. If I could have the relationship that I needed and wanted, if I could have the friendships, if I could have the job or career, if I could have the educational pathway, if I could adopt civic responsibility in an optimized manner, if I could engage in some creative enterprise, if I took care of myself properly, if I regulated my susceptibility to temptations, what would that look like if it was optimized? And then that sets you up a goal that has some motivational force. This is worth doing. And then you might find, well, you don't do it anyways. And then I would say, well, that's because you're biting off more than you can chew. The next goal is to take your goal and to fragment it into micro goals until you find a micro goal that's small enough that it still presents some challenge that you will do. And so I've become, one of the things I'm known for, I suppose, is my advice to people to clean up their rooms. And the people who think I'm their enemy laugh about that rule because of its simplicity, let's say. But the only reason they think it's simple is because they've never tried it. It's actually extremely difficult. And it was very frequently the case that, well, it's very difficult to put your room, your office, your bedroom in order. I mean, you think about your bedroom, hypothetically, let's say you're married, you share that room with someone else. Is your bedroom in order? Really? And I don't just mean, is it neat? Maybe it's too neat. Maybe it's too orderly. Maybe it's too sterile. Maybe it's too bare. Maybe that characterizes your whole bloody relationship. Maybe, really? And maybe that is genuinely reflected in the state of your room, because it's very probable that that room is a microcosm of your marriage. It's highly probable. And so what that would mean is to organize that room would require the organization of your marital life, not least because if you want to put that room in order, you're going to have to negotiate with your wife about how that's going to be done. And while you're making that negotiation, even in relationship to the micro details, you're going to encounter almost everything that's wrong with your relationship. And so you might ask yourself when you walk into your bedroom, I hate this bedroom. It's like, you should really think that through. And then you need to think through what you would need to do so that you love that room, or even more complexly, so that you both loved it. Because that's a tough thing to attain, boy, because you're going to have differences in taste, you're going to have differences in orderliness. There's all sorts of things that you're going to have to negotiate in order to make that room you both inhabit jointly desirable. Anyways, you set yourself a goal, ask yourself what goal you want to set, and then break the goal down into steps that are small enough so that even someone as pathetic as you could manage them. And that requires a tremendous humility. I know it was frequently the case, for example, with my clients, that I would do an analysis of their situation in life, and let's say, just for the sake of argument, that someone was 30, living at home, and in the bedroom they grew up in high school, in a complete bloody state of disorder, both moral and practical. And one of the relatively simple steps that we might agree upon with regards to moving forward is, the person might think, well, I'm 30, I'm really immature, I haven't taken any responsibility for my life, my mother still makes my bed and cleans up after me. It's like, well, why don't you just start with that? Because you're not going to just fix your life. Why don't you just try to clean up your room like you're a mature 14-year-old instead of a dreadfully dismal 30-year-old. And so, first of all, it's really hard for someone, even if they're desperate, to admit that that's necessary, right? Because it's so bloody humiliating. I mean, really, I'm so damn useless that my basic goal is going to be to clean up my bedroom. It's like, well, looks like it. And actually, it's worse than that, because then you ask the person, you negotiate with the person, they say, well, I'll try to clean up my room. Then they come back the next week and they say, I had one client, this was so funny, he's going to vacuum his rug. That was his goal for the week. He just had a child out of wedlock, and he was afraid that he was going to be a very bad father, which was a very realistic fear. And so he wanted to put himself together, you know, and so that's why he came to see me. And he lived in this squalor, and one thing we decided to do was that he could vacuum the rug, which he hadn't done for like 12 years because his mother would do it. And so it was so funny, it's so unbelievably comical. He went and got the vacuum, a stand-up vacuum, an upright vacuum, and he brought it into his room, but he didn't bring it all the way in. He put it in the doorway, leaning like this across the doorway. And then instead of vacuuming his room, he stepped over that bloody vacuum cleaner for a whole week and then came and told me that he couldn't do it. It's like, it's not surprising to me at all, because you think, well, that's such a trivial thing. It's like, if it was such a trivial thing, he'd have a clean room. It's not trivial at all. That chaos in his immediate environment was deeply emblematic of the chaos of his life. They were the same thing. And so for him to even begin the process of bringing order to chaos, which is a divine process, by the way, and the highest moral requirement, he had to be willing to face the catastrophe, the chaotic catastrophe of his life. And he hadn't done that for like 30 years. Why was he going to start that week? Just because he said he was going to? It's like, good luck. So what you do as a therapist in that situation is you just make the task smaller until you find a task so small, but still moving forward, that the person will do. So I might have said, I don't remember the particulars of the situation, I might have said, well, do you think you can get that vacuum cleaner, do you think you could move it out of the doorway into your room? That's all you have to do this week. Do you think you can do that? And I'd say that and offer that without being contemptuous. Like, you have to be very careful about such things. And I know that this is more complicated than it looks. And I also know that the first step taken towards the domination of chaos and its transformation into order is a cardinal and difficult step. And so you can make it small, and that's fine, it'll still work. So I might say, well, just move the vacuum cleaner inside your room. And then I would also say to someone in that situation, don't do more than that. If the agreement that you've made with me and with yourself is that that's enough, abide by the contract that you've written with yourself, and allow yourself to be grateful for the fact that you had the courage to take even a single step forward. And don't push your bloody luck, because maybe you'll have a brief fit and vacuum the whole rug, and then you'll be so annoyed at how you've destabilized your entire life that you'll redouble your attempts to make a mess, and the place will be more like hell than ever for 2 months. It's very probable that that sort of thing will occur if you break the contract you've set with yourself. The upside of this is, because you think, oh my God, that's so dismal, I have to start that low. It's like, yeah, probably, especially if it's a real difficult thing you're trying to sort out. You have to start as low as you are useless, and that's low. So, but the upside is that progress accelerates. It's not linear, and so if you take once you take the first step, the probability that you'll take a slightly larger second step increases, and that increases non-linearly. And so once you get the ball rolling, so to speak, once you start pushing the rock uphill, you can do it faster and faster. And so even if you have to start in a very humiliating manner, that doesn't mean that's where you'll end. One of the things that Tammy and I learned to do, and this was a consequence of me being trained as a behavior therapist, is, you know, we'll just take an example that maybe I was trying to learn how to compliment her when she dressed nicely. And maybe the fact that I wasn't good at that was manifest in the fact that she'd put some effort into her dress, and then I wouldn't respond in the appropriate manner, and that would dishearten her. And I don't particularly remember that exactly happening, but it'll be a perfectly reasonable example. And so then she would be displeased. And then the question would be, well, is she displeased because I'm too stupid to offer a proper compliment? Or is she displeased because she's so needy and lacking confidence that she needs a compliment that would go beyond the ordinary? And the answer is, what the hell do we know? Could be one or the other or both. And so what's a possible solution to that? And one possible solution would be, okay, if you do put some effort into your appearance, or I do, we could reverse the situation, but if you put some effort into your appearance and you would like to hear from me exactly the words that would give you, that would reward you for doing that and provide you with the confidence to attempt it again in the future, what would those words be?
You look good without a beard, dear.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah. Very funny. Very funny. And so, and then you can say, well, if you tell me those words, I will repeat them back to you. And then the person who needs the words might object, well, that's false, it's superficial, it's artificial, it's not spontaneous. And if you really loved me, I wouldn't have to tell you what to say. It's like, well, all of that's wrong. It's like, just because I love you doesn't mean I'm not stupid. And so, in fact, I love you might even be evidence that I am, in fact, stupid. So like, help me out here. I don't know what you want, and maybe you could just tell me, and then I'll tell you what you want, and I'll do it stupidly and badly. But I'll be slightly better at it the next time, and maybe if you let me practice 50 times stupidly and badly, I'll get reasonably good at it, and then that's something that we'll be both good at for the rest of our lives. And that's something worth knowing. You know, if you imagine you're upset with your partner because they haven't delivered something to you, whatever it is that you want, and then there's two questions that arises, right? Are you just like immature and greedy and self-centered, or are they useless and incapable of delivering? And neither of you know, and you have to sort that out. And then you also, as the injured party, let's say, might regard it as a moral necessity on your part to indicate to your partner exactly what you want, is to tell them. Like, it looks to me like if you did this or said this, then that would satisfy me. And then you might say, well, is that reasonable? Do you feel that it would be reasonable for you to offer that? Would you be willing to offer that? Am I pushing you too far? Those are all things that have to be sorted out. And then you can practice that, and you can practice that with the resolution of every dispute that emerges. If you're willing to take to yourself the responsibility of communicating to your partner your conditions for satisfaction. It means you have to admit them to yourself too, which is also very difficult. And then you can help your partner take stupid incremental steps forward, you know, in the direction that you'd like to see expand, and then you can get better at that. And it's unbelievably useful. You can get better at how you have dinner together or breakfast or lunch. Those things repeat every day, so they're very important. You can get better at how you greet each other when you come home. You can get better at the routine that you fall into, let's say, when you go to bed at night or when you wake up in the morning. All these things that repeat, you know, because that's your life, the things that repeat. You can conceptualize how you might like them to be ordered if they were undertaken in an optimal manner, and you can start incrementally moving forward to that. And you can do that by communicating what you need and want, and by carefully rewarding your partner for taking the appropriate incremental steps forward. And so if you're trying to discipline yourself, you make a goal, you break it down into micro goals, and you implement the micro goals and reward yourself for doing so. And if you do that reliably and you make that a practice, that you'll become more disciplined across time, and you'll move towards the fulfillment of your goals. And that's practically how that's the practical guide for success on that front.
So let me bring in another chapter that nobody ever asks about, which is chapter 4 on puberty. And I spent a lot of time in that chapter talking about initiation rites, because most societies, traditional societies, have, you know, a girl has to be turned into a woman. Now, girls will, without any socialization, girls will begin to menstruate. They will become fertile, and so societies almost usually mark that point. But for girls, there's a sense that this will happen, and then they have to be inducted into the secrets about sex and parenthood and all those things. Boys, what I learned from my time in cultural psychology, boys is much harder because boys don't turn into men just by getting older. Little boys are kind of like girls, and they're with their mothers. But especially in a warrior society, you have to get them from the world of girls and women to become a man. How do you do that? Well, a lot of toughening. They need a lot of toughening, and it's a long, drawn-out initiation. And we still see this in fraternities and sororities. Sorority initiations, I believe, are universally more mild at any university than the fraternity. The boys go through much harsher rituals. But where I'm going with this is, how do you turn a boy into a man or a girl into a woman? How do you turn a child into an adult of their sex? You have to have some guidance from elders, from someone a little older, who is imparting knowledge to them, who is choosing what they consume in the sense of what stories, what inputs. And while we didn't do a great job of that, I mean, when you and I were growing up, a lot of the messages came from television, but at least those messages were made. None of the TV we watched was by other children. None of it was created by other children. It was all created by people in our parents' or our grandparents' generation. And it often had a moral. And it was, for me, it was very American. It was like, this is part of. So television and movies used to play a huge role in putting in the patterns, the knowledge that you need to be a member of your culture.
And books.
And books, thank you. Yes, of course, and books. So that's why people have cared so much about education and literature, because it's not just the facts you're learning. It's back to our point earlier about the reinforcement learning. If our minds are like an LLM, what are you putting in? Are you putting in movies and books and good television? Or are you putting in little 10-second clips of people getting kicked in the balls? So if you're consuming just millions of little short videos, you're putting garbage in, and your neural network is not going to be very effective. So
not integrated. Not integrated with other people.
That's right.
Yeah.
And no depth. And to bring it back to your point, that the depth of an idea is the degree to which other ideas depend on it. What if you don't have any such ideas? What if all you consumed was little 10-second videos? Nothing is foundational. It's just a whirlwind of dust. There's no foundation.
Yeah, well, that's high entropy. There's no difference between high entropy and anxiety. And there's no union of motivation, so there's no compelling reason to act, to move forward. That's chaos. Yeah. That's the disintegration into chaos.
And that's where a lot of
that's anxiety and demoralization.
Yeah, a lot of our kids are stuck there.
Okay, let's close this off by the end of your book. You talk about what people can do, and so and you talk about what people can do at different levels of social organization, parents, governments, industry. Now, a huge part of the problem is technological rate of transformation and the race to the bottom, right? And that's something that's almost independent of the actors, unfortunately. It's implicit in the technology. But anyways, and I'd also like, I think this is what we'll do on the Daily Wire side. I would like to talk to you about what has happened in consequence of your book and what effective steps people have taken. So let's do that. But give people an overview of what you think the institutions, broadly speaking, must and should do about this fragmentation and race to the bottom.
So the key to understanding how this problem got so big so fast and why it's so hard to get out of is the concept of a collective action problem. And so any parent who says, no, sweetheart, I'm not giving you a phone, you're 10 years old, but Mom, all my friends have one, I'm being left out. That's a collective action problem. If it was only half of the kids had it, it would be very easy to resist. But when your child's the only one, same with social media. And so these things, with cigarettes, at the peak of teen smoking in the 90s, it was, I think, 37% of American high school students smoked. You didn't have to smoke because a third of your classmates were smoking. Well, with social media, you do. If half your classmates are on and they're talking about you, you have to be on. Everybody ends up on. So it's a collective action problem. How do you solve collective action problems? Collectively, And so you can have, so what I propose 4 norms that if we can do these 4 norms, we roll back the phone-based childhood. And there's a role for different actors to, but here are the 4 main norms. The first is no smartphone before high school. Let kids have a flip phone, a basic phone, let them communicate, let them call each other, let them text. But do not let these companies get to them and take up every moment of their day. Now, I don't think this should be a law. In Europe, when I'm there, sometimes they say, oh, we should pass a law banning smartphones for those under 14. You know, as an American, I don't think we should say, no, you know, you parents, you cannot give your child. I mean, so this is a norm. And as long as a bunch of parents start adhering to it, it becomes easier for everyone in the community to do it. So that's the first norm. No smartphone before high school, or 14 if it's not in your country high school. The second norm is no social media till 16. Now this, some of us are doing as a norm. I've laid this down for my kids. But it's hard because I'm imposing a cost on my daughter. She says she's the only one who doesn't have Snapchat. That might be an exaggeration, but it feels all her friends have it and they communicate with it. Here is where we really, really need help from legislators. We have minimum ages on things that involve graphic sex, horrific violence, addiction, and physical harm. If your kid's on Instagram, Snapchat, and TikTok, they're getting all that. So these are inherently adult activities, talking with adult strangers. We need a minimum age. And Australia has done it. Australia passed a law, it's going to take effect in November, that the minimum age is 16, and the companies have to enforce it. And there are a lot of ways to do that. So many companies do age verification. So that's the second norm. The third norm is phone-free schools. This is just a no-brainer. When you and I were in school, you know, I mean, imagine if we could take our television set into school and watch TV during class and use our walkie-talkies and talk to our friends during class. I mean, it's insane. We never could have done that. But everyone with a smartphone has a lot more than that. They have 50 different things to do during class. So it's crazy that we ever let it get this far. But many states, about 11 or 12 states and a bunch of countries have now gone phone-free. It has to be from the beginning of the day to the end. So that's the main area where the world has changed in the last year, is phone-free schools. And then the fourth norm is far more free play, far more independence, free play, and responsibility in the real world. Because the book isn't about technology or social media, it's about childhood. And a phone-based childhood is not a human childhood. Kids are going to miss out on most of the things they need. So we can't just take away the devices and say, okay, you're an only child, sit at home, read books, play guitar. Like, they could do that a little bit, but we have to give them back each other. We have to give them back fun. We have to give them back thrilling adventure, hanging out, riding bicycles, going down and going down to the 7-Eleven, buying things you shouldn't buy, whatever. So if we do those 4 things, then we restore childhood in the real world. I believe that rates of anxiety and depression will go down. I believe kids will have more slow dopamine. It won't be all quick dopamine all day long. Test scores, I believe, will stop dropping. This is important. Test scores in the United States actually rose. Academic ability actually rose from the 70s through 2012, and then it began to drop. It dropped more during COVID, but the drop didn't start in 2020. It started in 2012. So our young people are less happy, more anxious and depressed. They know less. Their attention is fragmented. They're lonely, and they feel that their life is pointless. We've got to stop. We've got to stop what we're doing. And the book lays out, those last chapters lay out what role governments can and should play, what role parents can and should play, what role schools can and should play, and to some extent what the tech companies can do. But they have so much money at stake here that I don't expect them. I mean, there are a few like Pinterest that are not harming kids. They've done some things to really protect kids. But the main ones are only going to respond to either legislation or litigation. So I'm hopeful that their behavior will change. But that's what the last part of the book is about. How do we solve this? And I actually think we can solve this in the next few years.
So what we'll do on the Daily Wire side, for those of you who are watching and listening and who are prone to continue the discussion there, is I want to find out more from Dr. Haidt, from Jonathan, from John, what steps have been taken, because I know there has been movements in many states, many provinces in Canada, on the phone-free school front, for example. But I would like to know how widespread that is, who's spearheading it, what's been effective, how this can be moved ahead in the future, the potential pitfalls of intervention of this sort, etc. So you can all join us on the Daily Wire side for that discussion to continue.
You cite a tired brain, foggy thinking, as the reason to stop answering questions or giving a talk. How do you combat this while working or writing daily? Well, I eat a big breakfast relatively soon on waking. That really helps. If any of you out there are anxious, and many of you no doubt are, there'll be a large number of you who are anxious and don't eat breakfast. There'll be a whole bunch of you out there who think, well, I don't eat breakfast. It isn't necessary. It's like, that's wrong. It's necessary. You fasted all night. If you load yourself cognitively or physiologically in the morning, your brain, stressed, will encourage your body to produce insulin. It will take all the blood sugar out of your blood, and then you're done for the day. And then you'll be anxious. And a lot of the rest of you too, you'll find if you're anxious, try this. It's really, really interesting experiment. The next time you're anxious, go eat something. Eat some protein and fat would be best. You could have cheese and crackers. I'm not a big fan of carbohydrates, but whatever. Eat whatever you're willing to eat, but make it solid. Don't eat a peanut butter, or don't eat a chocolate bar or something sweet. Eat something substantial, a piece of meat, a piece of cheese, some peanut butter, something like that. And then wait 10 minutes and see if you're less anxious. And try that for like 2 weeks. Every time you get anxious, eat something. Because then you can find out if your anxiety is linked to low blood sugar. And it's very likely that it is, especially if you also get irritable and foggy in your thinking. And the best way to treat that, as far as I've been able to tell, and there's a decent literature on this, is to make sure that you eat a big breakfast. And you might say, well, I'm not hungry in the morning. It's like, who the hell cares if you're hungry? I didn't say enjoy your breakfast. I said eat it. That's not the same thing. There's lots of things that you need to do that you don't enjoy to begin with. You'll get hungry in 6 months, and then you'll start to enjoy it. So that's a massive difference. I take small naps quite frequently. If I'm wiped out, I'll go have a nap for 10 minutes or 15 minutes. And then that helps quite a lot. I try to wake up on a fairly regular schedule. That's another thing I would really recommend for people whose lives are in disarray and who are anxious. Try to fix your wake time. Going when you sleep, that's not so important. So you can still, stay up late and have fun and all that. But getting up in the morning is really helpful. So, and you also have to figure out how much you can work or write. I can't write for more than about my sustainable maximum for writing is 3 hours a day. And if I push it past that, then, especially if I'm editing, I make mistakes when I'm editing, so that's counterproductive, and I can't sustain it across time. And so I don't really think you can do more than about 3 hours of extremely intense intellectual work a day. Although if you have a nap, you can stretch that, but I think at least I end up paying for it across time. So nap, make sure you eat, and make sure that you get enough sleep. So that's how I combat it and try to make myself hyper efficient.
Carl Jung talked about this phenomenon he described as retrogressive restoration of the persona. It's a complicated idea, but basically what it means is that sometimes you take a leap forward and you learn some things, but you can't catalyze a new identity, so you try to go back and hide in your old identity. And that actually doesn't work because, well, things have changed and you've learned something and that isn't who you are anymore. And so it's like you have to cut parts of yourself off in a destructive manner to fit back into the person that you were. Now what happens here is that Pinocchio escapes from this tyrannical situation and undergoes this descent into chaos, but he tries to go back home. He tries to go back to what he was. And he can't do that anymore. His father isn't at home anymore. And so when he goes home, he finds that there's no home there. Now, this happens to people sometimes, and it's often a shock to them. So they'll often stay under the thumb of their father. And you think, well, why would someone do that? Because it means they're subject to the tyrannical judgment of their father. They're always concerned about what their father would think or whether their father approves of them, and so forth. And you think, well, that's got to be an unpleasant place to be. Why would you do that? Freud said, for example, that no one could be a man unless his father had died.
And Jung said, yes, but that death can take place symbolically. Okay, so there's that part of the idea. And then another part of the idea is, one of the times in your life when you actually realize that you're an individual is when you'll go and ask your parents something and you'll realize they actually don't know any more about what you should do than you do. And that sucks. And that's partly why people are often willing to maintain a tyrant-slave relationship with their father. It's like, on the one hand, you have to be inferior in a relationship like that. You know, you've always got the judge watching you. But on the other hand, there's always someone who knows what to do. There's always someone standing between you and the unknown that you can go ask, what should I do? Well, at some point, you'll realize that the reason you can't ask that anymore is because they actually don't know any more than you do. And then that's a pain. Like that is a symbolic death. And that's also when you establish a more individual relationship with your parents. It's at that point that you could conceivably start taking care of them instead of the reverse. And that's a time that should come. But you have to let that image of perfection go. And that exposes you. Well, that's what happens here. You know, Pinocchio goes home and he wants things to be the way they were, and he wants to stay under the careful care of the benevolent father, but that's no longer possible. He's past that point, and that's why the father has disappeared. And so Geppetto has gone off to look for Pinocchio because he also needs his son, but in any case the house is abandoned. And so then we see inside the house that everything's covered with cobwebs and everything's gone, and Pinocchio and the cricket sit on the steps and they're very concerned. First of all, they wonder where he went, so they're actually concerned that he's gone, but they also don't know what to do because there's just no going home. And so, you know, that's also the case that once you hit a certain point in your development, well, it's the same thing we already talked about. The answers that you're looking for are not going to be found in your parents' house. It's as simple as that. Now, you could artificially maintain your dependency, but, you know, if you do that for too long, things get pretty ugly. I called the course Personality and Its Transformations, and I think you could think about that as a restatement of the idea of being and becoming. And that's what you are. You're, for whatever that means, you're an entity that both is and is transforming. And there's a rule that goes along with that, by the way, which is don't sacrifice who you could be for who you are. Which means if you have to choose to transform in a positive direction or maintain your current position, then it's better to transform in a positive direction. So you might even think of that as the core of your being. That's a Piagetian idea. It's a Jungian idea as well. Who are you? You're the thing that transforms who you are. Now, you're also who you are, but on top of that, you're the thing that transforms who you are. And I do think that that's not an arbitrary statement. You know, one of the things that modern universities do dreadfully now is convince their students that value structures are relative, and that's a big mistake. There's a lot of things wrong with that idea, and one of the things that's wrong with that idea is that doesn't include what I just mentioned, which is that's a good moral rule, is you are the thing that is and you're the thing that becomes, and you should put the thing that becomes at a higher place than the thing that is. That means you also have to allow yourself to shake off those things about you that you might be pathologically attached to, habits and people, for that matter, ways of thinking, all of those things. You have to allow yourself to shake those off, and that's more like a burning. That's why the phoenix is the symbol that it is, right? It's old and it deteriorates, it bursts into flame, and then it's reborn. It's like, well, do you want to be reborn? It's like, well, that's not the question. The question is, do you want to burst into flame? And the answer to that generally is no, but that's the wrong answer. The right answer is you let all that nonsense burn away. And you know, and you might say, well, I don't know what I should leave behind. And the answer to that is that's a lie. You know some of the things that you should leave behind. All you have to do is ask yourself. You'll come up with a list instantly of 100 stupid things that you're doing that you know you could stop doing. Some of them maybe you don't know you could stop doing. It's like, well, fine, leave those alone for now. But there's a bunch of things you perfectly know well that you could stop doing that would improve your life. And so do that, see what happens. That's a good idea. All right. So it's personality and its transformations, because partly I wanted to talk to you about what you are as a human being and also as an individual, but also what you could become. And that's actually a crucial question in the domains of clinical psychology in particular, because a lot of what you're doing with people as a clinician is trying to figure out who they could become. That's right. You have a problem, your life isn't what it could be. It's like, fine, let's see what it could be like if we changed it. We'll figure out how to change it. That's got to be a negotiated dialogue, right? Because like, I don't know what the hell you should do with your life. I can help you figure it out, maybe we can talk about it, but you are the person who has to decide if the things that you're aiming for, you know, get you out of bed in the morning, because that's really that's at least one of the crucial issues. So you got to specify the goal, and then you got to specify the transformation processes and start practicing them. And you have to understand that you're going to be bad at it, but it doesn't matter, because bad's fine. Persistent is what you need to be. If you persist with tiny improvements, if you persist, you win. So okay, so in a broader context, you can think about this as a more fundamental ontological question. So one question is how you should act in the world. The other question is, well, what is the world? And that's a complicated problem. This is a scientific answer to that question, and that is that the world is a collection of objective phenomena, and that's a very powerful perspective. And we have a good method for determining what the world is like as a collection of objective phenomena. And that's made us very technologically powerful, and so more power to us and all that, but leaves a question unanswered. And the question is, well, the world isn't just a place of objective phenomena, because it's not a panoply of inert matter. It has living conscious creatures in it, and they're a different order of being. And the fundamental issue for conscious active creatures is not what is the world from an objective perspective, but how it is that you should conduct yourself in the world. And there's a kind of unbridgeable gap between those two domains of inquiry. And I think the reason for that is that the scientific method removes value from its descriptions. That's actually what it does. And so once you're left with value-free descriptions, it's very difficult to extract out a value proposition from them, because that's the scientific method removes the value propositions. You're supposed to be left with only that which is objective, right? And value propositions are in the domain of the subjective. So I think the idea that you can derive what you should be or do from a collection of facts is flawed, A, because the collecting the facts themselves gets rid of the value structure, but B, there's an infinite number of facts, and so how are you going to pick which ones should guide you? You can't. You can't. You have to do something else. The facts do not tell you what to do with the facts. You need something else to help you figure that out. Well, it's come to me over the years that that's what the narrative cognitive framework does. It's the framework that we use to specify how we should act in the world. And so you could divide the world into the world as it is and the world as perhaps it should be. That gives you some direction, and you need that, and we know this technically, right? You need direction. The reason for that is it's direction that produces primary positive emotion. And so if you need positive emotion to move through life, which you do, because you can't even move without positive emotion, and also positive emotion is a good bulwark against terror and pain. If you need those things, then you need direction, you need a goal, you need a value structure. So that doesn't seem particularly disputable to me. You could still say, well, what value structure? It's like, okay, fine, that's a good question. But I've thought a lot about that too. So if we're going to adopt a value structure, there's a couple of rules that go along with it. And this is why the bloody postmodernists are wrong, as far as I can tell, is A, it can't just be my value structure, because I'm stuck with you. And we're both stuck with all these other people. And so if I'm going to lay out a value structure, which is a way of interpreting the world, let's say, and there's an infinite number of potential ways of interpreting the world, it's like, yeah, fine, no problem, except that I have to interpret the world in a way that I can use while I'm dealing with you, and while the two of us are dealing with everyone else, and while all of you are dealing with everyone else. And so that's the Piagetian game proposition. If you want to be a popular kid on the playground, you better play games that other people want to play. That's a brilliant observation. And I told you that Piaget was trying to heal the rift between science and religion, and that's one of the things that he did that he thought helped do that. The question is, well, where do moral judgments come from? Well, they emerge as a consequence of consensus, and it's a bounded domain. If we're going to occupy the same space for any length of time, and those are two critical propositions, the same space and a long time, then we have to figure out how to play an iterative game that doesn't spiral downward, hopefully that might even improve, that we both don't object to, because otherwise it's not going to work, right? You'll walk away and play another game, or the game will disintegrate catastrophically. So there's massive social constraint on what constitutes an appropriate frame of reference. So much for the relativist argument. And then there's another issue that's equally relevant, and it's associated with the idea of objective reality to some degree, but it's not exactly, that's not exactly correct, because it's not exactly objective reality. Let's say that you and I decide to occupy the same place for some substantial amount of time, and we figured out how to solve the problem of being together. But you and I still have to figure out how to solve the problem of being together in a manner that doesn't make the world object too much. And it isn't just other people, although that's a huge part of the world. You want them to not object. You may even want them to support you. That would even be better. But you also have to deal with the tendency of matter to object. Because so your mode of being in the world, your interpretive framework, as a description of how you should act, is actually the laying out of a strategy that will produce the ends that it predicts, which are the things that you want. So this is the pragmatist perspective. This was worked out by William James and his people back in the late 1800s in New England, the only genuine brand of American philosophy. And what the pragmatist said is, how do you decide if something's true? The answer is, how the hell can you? You don't know anything. Well, that's true, but that isn't helpful, because there you're stuck with the problem of how to be in the world. Well, so what you do is you lay out a mode of interpretation that has an endpoint. And then you run the mode of interpretation, embodied, right, because you act it out. And if it doesn't produce the outcome, then it's not, well, let's say, true. The claims within it they're not true by the definition of the game itself. So you might say, well, you're a kid on a playground. You want to play a game. One of the implicit demands is that the game is fun. If it's not fun, it's not worth playing. So you play it for a while, and then you see, well, was that fun? If the answer is yes, then you keep playing the game. You say, well, that game it's good enough, it's accurate enough, it's true enough. And so you lay out interpretations in the world, and they're subject to massive constraints. Other people have to go along with them and cooperate with you, because if they don't, then look the hell out, like it's a major, serious, non-trivial constraint. And then the other thing is, well, social proof isn't good enough. It also has to work in the world outside of the social world. So if you have an illness and you have some hypothesis about how to construe it, you might say, well, is my understanding of the illness correct? Well, it implies that I take these actions. Well, how do you know if it's correct? Well, you take the actions, and if the illness gets worse, then by the definitions that are implicit in the framework of reference that you're using, you've made an error. And so there's no relativism in that. You could still say, well, there's a lot of potential solutions to any potential set of problems. It's like, yeah, there's lots of different ways to play chess on a single board. Right, but that doesn't mean that any old solution is as good as any other solution. It doesn't mean that at all. So, okay, so then we're looking at things two ways. We're trying to figure out, well, how does the world present itself, and then how is it that you should act in it? And so, well, there's other constraints on the mechanisms of interpretation that you place in the world. So we could say, well, you're constrained in your interpretations by the constraints that other people place on you. But there's internal constraints as well. We talked about those mostly from a biological perspective, because you could also regard yourself in some sense as a loose internal society. And that's sort of a psychoanalytic dictum, right? You're a collection of sub-personalities, or you could say you're a collection of sub-routines. I don't care how you formulate it, but you're a unity, but you're a unity that brings together a plurality of subcomponents. And part of the constraints on how it is that you lay out your interpretation of the world is that you have to satisfy those internal subsystems, right? So you're the ego, but it's more like you're the captain of a ship full of people who are rowing. You got to keep the people rowing. You're not tyrant. You're not omnipotent tyrant of your own destiny. You're constrained by the nature of your own being. And so you have to provide yourself with food, and you have to provide yourself with shelter, and you have to provide yourself with water, and all of these things. And those are demands that are laid on you by the nature of your internal processes. And of course, how they lay themselves out as demands and what the appropriate solutions to that to those problems is debatable infinitely. But you can see the constraints stack up. you have to satisfy your internal constraints. So they have to be brought into a unity. That seems to happen, at least in part, but between the ages of 2 and something like between the ages of birth and 4 years old, maybe even 2 years old. You bring yourself together into something that's sort of functioning as a unity. Then you have to turn that unity into a unity that can function in the social world with increasing breadth. And that unity in the social world has to be a unity that can function inside the natural world. It's something like that. So you're stacking up these games into a hierarchy of increasing complexity. And one of the questions that emerges from that is, well, what should be at the top of the hierarchy? If it's a hierarchical structure, it has to be a hierarchical structure because some things have to be worth doing more than others, or you can't act, which is another thing I really don't like about the postmodernist ethos, because it claims that value structures are there to eliminate, to exclude and oppress, and never once notices that, well, yeah, fair enough, but value structures are also there so that you know which way to walk, because you can't figure out which way to walk without saying that that direction is preferable to that direction. So you're stuck with the damn things. And they do exclude. Obviously, category structures exclude. The question is, if you're going to have a value structure, how is it that it should be constituted? Well, I already described some of the constraints. Like if your value structure is perfectly functioning except that you don't get enough to eat, that turns out actually to be a fatal problem, right? And it might be, you can run into all sorts of fatal problems. You're too lonesome. Well, it means let's say that your value structure is too narcissistic. There's lots of reasons to be lonesome, but that might be one of them. Or you're too timid or something like that. Like you're going to be informed by your own internal biological mechanisms when the value structure that you're laying out in the world is insufficient to keep itself propagating across time. And some of that's just you, and some of that's other people, and some of that's the natural world. Constraints galore. And so in the face of all those constraints, it's absolutely unreasonable to say any old solution goes. Just try it. Generate a random solution. Run it as a simulation in the world. And see how many slings and arrows come your way. There'll be plenty. And you might say, well, I don't care about slings and arrows. It's like, yeah, no. That's a claim you don't get to make. So, okay, so you're being informed internally as to the nature of your value structure. You have to specify where you are. You have to specify where you're going. You have to integrate all your underlying biological mechanisms into that schema. It's something I think that's actually kind of weak about the Piagetian ideas, hey? Because Piaget, I'm a great fan of Piaget, but Piaget tended to think that the child came into the world with nothing but a set of reflexes. I mean, that's his technical claim, and that you bootstrap off those reflexes, and I think it underestimates the degree to which the child comes into the world as an already prepared unit. And I mean, he just thought of those things as so self-evident that you don't need to talk about them, but that's actually not true. You do need to talk about them. We know, for example, that if you provide children with food and shelter, and adequate food and shelter, but you don't interact with them socially, almost all of them die in the first year, right? It's not optional. Touch is not optional for children. Attention is not optional for children. Play is not optional for children. So it isn't just like, well, the child comes into the world with a set of reflexes and can adapt to any old environment. It's like, no, the environment has to be structured in a certain way or the child will die. And it's very interesting when it comes to things like play and touch, because you wouldn't think of those as fundamental necessities, right? But it turns out that they are. If you deprive a child badly enough of play and touch in the first 3 years of their life, even if they survive, what comes out at the end of that is often something that's like barely recognizable as a functional human being and cannot be repaired after that point. And that experiment was done with Romanian orphans back in the 90s. So it was an ugly situation, to say the least. Okay, so now you take these underlying biological systems and maybe they aggregate themselves into something that vaguely looks like your temperament, your 5 temperamental dimensions. So maybe if you're an extrovert, you're dominated by the dopaminergic system, just like you are if you're high in openness. And if you're high in neuroticism, it's mostly that you're dominated by anxiety systems and systems that mediate emotional pain. And if you're agreeable, you're dominated by the function of the underlying maternal/care affiliation systems. But so you could say, well, you've got a multitude of fundamental biological predispositions that manifest themselves as implicit stories, something like that, and they organize themselves into the primary temperaments, and the primary temperaments are biasing factors that determine in part the nature of the interpretive structure that you're going to lay out in the world. It's not entirely determined by your temperament. We know that personality is only predicting, you know, something like, let's say 10% of the variance in most complex social outcomes. And the other elements are, well, temperamental as you might be, you still have to get along with other people and the world. So you come in with these internal biases, but they still have to be modified extensively by your social and your natural surround. Okay, and then you develop your routines from the bottom up, as Piaget pointed out, and sometimes from the top down, because now and then you can think yourself into a radical transformation. But mostly what you're doing is building the micro units of your interpretive schemas and your behaviors and aggregating them into higher order structures that you can then tag with higher order abstractions. And we talked about that. You can't tell a 3-year-old to clean up his room. And the reason for that is those are empty boxes as far as the kid's concerned. Clean, he might have room, he might have that. Clean he doesn't have. He might have pick up the teddy bear and put it in that space, right? So that's one of these little micro routines. And maybe you say, you put 20 of those micro routines together and now you can say clean up your room, and basically what you're saying is implement the 10 micro routines that you've learned. And so a well-functioning personality has all the micro routines in place. That's actually something that you help people with if you're a behavioral therapist, because one of the things you assume if you're a behavioral therapist is that sometimes the reason people aren't doing things is because they don't know how. You know, sometimes maybe the person's depressed but potentially high functioning. They got all the damn micro routines. They're well socialized. They're just dormant. You got to get them awake again and implementing them. But sometimes you get someone in your practice, say, who's just been neglected like you cannot believe, right? The parents never paid any attention to them, or maybe just punished them every time they did something good. That's really fun. And then, you know, they didn't make friends, and so they're really, really vague and poorly articulated. And so then what you do is you work at the bottom of the micro routines and get them to practice building up all these little attributes that they didn't build up. And you know, one of the things you can think about in terms of character development is, so now maybe you understand something about your own personality. You might say, well, what could you do to improve your personality? And the answer is develop some of the micro routines on the other side of the personality distribution. So if you're disagreeable as hell, maybe you could start learning how to do nice things for people. And that actually works, by the way. So if you take disagreeable people who are depressed and you get them doing nice things for other people, their depression tends to lift. But then by the same token, if you're agreeable, then you should practice doing some things for yourself and being more tough-minded in your negotiations. And so you can sort of place yourself on the personality trait distribution. You know, you're extroverted. It's like, okay, man, learn to spend some time with yourself, right? You're low in openness. Well, try reading a book that's outside of your, you know, your sphere of interest now and then. If you're conscientious, well, you should probably learn how to relax occasionally, and so forth. So you can, I think partly what you're doing as you're developing your personality is not moving the mean much, the average, where, you know, where you're located, but you're extending the standard deviation so that you're a bigger bag of tricks than you were before. And I think you can practice that consciously. It's like, you're hyper orderly. It's, well, get a dog, you know. Dogs are messy, horrible things, you know. It's just what you need if you're hyper orderly, because they're going to leave hair everywhere and force you to live with it. Stop doing the things that you know are wrong that you could stop doing. Right? So it's a fairly limited attempt. First of all, we're not going to say that you know what the good is or what the truth is in any ultimate sense. But we will presume that there are things that you're doing that for one reason or another you know are not in your best interests. There's something about them that you just know you should stop. They're kind of self-evident to you. Other things you're going to be doubtful about. You're not going to know which way is up and which way is down. But there are things that you're doing that you know you shouldn't do. Now, some of those you won't stop doing for whatever reason. You don't have the discipline, or maybe there's a secondary payoff, or you don't believe it's necessary, or it's too much of a sacrifice, or you're angry or resentful or afraid. Who knows? So forget about those for now. But there's another subset that you could stop doing. It might be a little thing. Well, that's fine. Stop doing it and see what happens. And what'll happen is your vision will clear a little bit. And then something else will pop up in your field of apprehension that you will also know you should stop doing, and that you could stop doing, because you strengthened yourself a bit by stopping doing the particular stupid thing that you were doing before. That just puts you together a little bit more. And you could do that repeatedly for an indefinite period of time. And you know, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to ever be able to formulate a clear and final picture of what constitutes the truth and the good, but it does mean that you'll be able to continually move away from what's untruth and what's bad. And you know, that's not a bad start. You have to treat yourself like you matter, because if you don't, then you don't take care of yourself, and you become vengeful and cruel, and you take it out on people around you, and you're not a positive force. None of that's good. So you suffer more, and so does everyone around you. And there's a malevolence that enters into it. None of that's good. So that's what happens if you don't treat yourself like you matter. And then, well, what happens if you don't treat other people like they matter? Well, you lie to them, you cheat them, you steal, you enter into impulsive relationships with them. They can't trust you. That doesn't go anywhere. They don't like you. You end up alone at best, and maybe like incarcerated at worst. Like, that doesn't work. And so you watch the people around you who thrive, regardless of what they say. They act out the proposition that everyone matters. And then you have a functional society. And I think, okay, well, if when you act out the proposition that everyone matters, you have a functional society, maybe that's evidence that that proposition is true. It's like, I think it's true. It's unbelievable how little genuine encouragement many people need, and how they had none. No one ever said to them, and meant it, it's not okay for you to be a weak loser. It's not okay. And the reason it's not okay is because you could be way more than that. And it's a crime, an ethical crime, for you to allow all that necessary potential to go to waste. It hurts you, it hurts your family, it hurts the world. Really, really, it does. And people think, oh, okay, I get it. And they do get it, because they know at some level. The other thing people tell me, you know, they say, well, I've been paying attention to your lectures, developing a vision for my life, trying to tell the truth, trying to adopt more responsibility, and things are way better. But the other story is, you've been able to help me put into words things I always knew to be true, but didn't know how to say, which is a good role for an intellectual to play. And so, well, so that's why this all makes me emotional. It's so good, you know, and so much of this has been covered as if it's political. It's not political, what I'm doing. It's not political. I don't tell people that they're okay the way they are. No, I say, no, you could be way more than you are. And they're relieved about that, you see, because if you're in a dark and terrible place and someone says you're okay the way you are, then you don't know what to do about that. It's like, no, I'm not. I'm having a terrible time, and I'm hopeless. You're okay the way you are. Well, then what? That's it? That's where I am? And what do you want to tell a young person? You're 17. You're okay the way you are. It's like, no, you're not. You got 60 years to be better, and you could be way better. You could be incomparably better across multiple dimensions. And in pursuing that better, that's where you'll find the meaning in your life. And that will give you the antidote to the suffering. People have asked me in my book why I wrote it as an antidote to chaos, you know, because, well, there isn't anything technically wrong with chaos. Chaos is a place of great potential. Well, the question is, what's the proper balance between chaos and order? Chaos, potential, and order. Well, the answer is, look, when you're a kid, you're all potential. It's chaotic potential. It can manifest itself in any number of ways. And maybe you don't want to give that up. So you're like Peter Pan. You want to be a kid forever because you don't want to give up the potential. And you look out in the world and all you see are Captain Hooks, you know, who've lost a hand, who are chased by death, because that's the clock in the crocodile. It's already got a taste of him. He's terrified by death, and he's a tyrant. Well, I don't want to grow up to be that. So I won't be disciplined at all. Well, that's no good, because the way the potential transforms itself into actuality is through discipline. And so then you, as you said, this is the trick though. You have to pick a path of discipline. What path of discipline you have to pick is a different issue. So there could be a rule. The rule might not be follow this rule. The rule might be you have to follow some rules. So it's a meta rule. And the meta rule is you have to discipline yourself. And the issue is, well, how?
that's not really the relevant question. You can pick a disciplinary path. That's why I often tell my clients, especially young people, they say, well, I don't know what to do. It's like, that's okay. Nobody does. Go do something. Do the best thing that you can think of. Put the best plan you have into practice. It's not going to be perfect, and it will change along the way. But it will change partly because you become disciplined pursuing the path. And as you become disciplined, you become wiser. And as you become wiser, you become able to formulate better and better plans. So you can start vaguely and confused and develop a plan that's not so great, and you start to implement it. And then you accrue incremental wisdom as you implement your flawed plan. And that enables you to fix the plan. And so that's part of that process of incremental self-improvement as well. You don't want someone else's fate. Man, your fate's enough. And your adventure's enough. It's plenty. It's more than you can ever fully realize. And so that's also part of the reason that we all believe that the individual has some intrinsic dignity. It's don't be so sure that your position and your room is so damn trivial. It might be your attitude towards it that's trivial. And if you're in dire straits and dire circumstances, just look at how much opportunity you have to make things better. Compare yourself to who you were yesterday and not to who someone else is today. The same basic idea, right, is that you have to get your markers for success right, because otherwise you can end up in the situation you described, which is that, like, there's always people out there who are doing far better than you on pretty much anything you want to imagine. And if all you're doing is seeing yourself in their reflected light, let's say, then it's going to be pretty damn dismal. But it's not a good comparison, because you shouldn't just compare. Well, first of all, there's danger in just comparing yourself to others, period, because they're not you, and God only knows what struggles they had to undertake to get to where they were, or what burdens they're currently carrying that you're not aware of. You just don't know any of that. But you can certainly contrast yourself with yourself, and that's a lot better. It is the only way. Well, it's also the only way of really measuring anything approximating proper improvement. You can actually tell when you're a little better than you were yesterday.
Right.
So, and you can actually do that. That's another thing that's so interesting about it, is that you can actually make yourself a little better in some way, pretty much. Well, I don't know if it's at every moment, but you can certainly do it every day. It's funny. I mean, you know, obviously, if you have a problem and you think about it, you can think up a solution. And it's not obvious how you do that. You know, I mean, it's not like you know how you're manipulating your neurons or something. Mm-hmm. It happens of its own accord in some sense, like you can participate in it, I guess, and you can interfere with it, and it seems to take a certain amount of willpower, but it still all happens mysteriously behind the scenes.
If you're obsessed by memories of the past, more than 18 months old, and most of those are negative, so anxiety-provoking most often, then there's a lot of you that's stuck in the past. And what that means is you didn't map the territory well enough, and the parts of your brain that are alarm systems, anxiety systems, are saying, no, there's holes in the way you're looking at the world. There's holes in the way that you're looking in the world. And you fell in them once, and you don't know where they are, and you don't know how to fill them, and you don't know how to walk around them, and so you can't forget them, you can't forget them, you can't forget them, you can't forget them. So you have recurring nightmares, for example, are a good example of that sort of thing happening. But in any case, if you have memories like that, you remember them, they make you feel anxious and negative, you're stuck back there. Your body is still reacting as if there's an emergency that could happen again that you haven't fixed. And it doesn't matter if it was your fault. That's irrelevant, because the alarm system doesn't care. Like, when your smoke detector goes off, it isn't relevant whether it was your fault. The smoke detector just says, house is on fire. And that's a bad thing. And your anxiety systems are like that. If they're tagging old memories with anxiety, then you have to do something about it, or you will be tortured by those memories forever, because that's how the alarm system works. And so maybe you need to go back there and clean things up. You got to figure out, okay, well, how did this happen? What sort of role did I play? Even if it's a minor role, that doesn't matter, because the point is that you don't want to be put in the same vulnerable position again. So anything you can do to strengthen yourself is good. You know, and often if it's a really old memory, like maybe you were a child, you're not a child now, so you probably have a variety of techniques at hand that you could use to deal with a situation like that if it came up now. And so you have to update that part of your brain that still thinks you're 4. And lots of people have parts of them that are still stuck in some traumatic childhood experience. And they don't. I had a friend like that who had a terrible childhood, and I mean really, I've had clients with terrible childhoods, and his was like top of the
top of the lobster hierarchy in terms of terrible childhoods. And whenever he had a dream about it, which was very often, he was 5 in his dream. Well, he's 58. You know, he's not 5, but hadn't been updated, and so he was still 5 in his dreams. It was a complete bloody nightmares for him, complete with all sorts of terrible physiological symptoms, really hurting his life. He couldn't get himself updated, and he's much older in his dreams now, by the way. He's up to about 45, so which is way better than 5, you know, because you can't fight back when you're 5, but you can fight back when you're 45, especially if you have some, you know, some experience at your disposal. So anyways, you need to know where you are. So let's say where you are is, well, you're on this stage, and you're on this side of the stage, and you decide that you're going to go over to that side of the stage, just to show that you can. And you're making the decision, the same decision that, you know, the famous chicken who is going to cross the road. Why does the chicken cross the road? Well, if it's a sensible chicken, it's because it assumes that there's something better on the other side of the road. It's like, or maybe it's random curiosity, but then it just gets picked off by a dingo or a coyote, so that's not so good. The other side of the road is better, so away the chicken goes. So that's what you're doing. You're going somewhere slightly better. And so that's good. Technically, it's good. Because the way that your positive emotion systems work, they run on a neurochemical called dopamine, which, by the way, is the neurochemical system that drugs like cocaine and methamphetamine and alcohol for some people and opiates affect dramatically and make people feel far better than they should, which is part of their danger. It's a very fundamental system. The dopamine system kicks in with a kick of positive emotion if you're going somewhere that's worth going. And so that's worth knowing. It's really worth knowing. It's like, okay, you want a little bit of positivity in your life. Well, how do you get it? Well, you've got to get the system. It's almost it's the left hemisphere system for most people. Not that that's particularly relevant, but it is a standalone neurochemical system. It's rooted very, very deeply in the brain's exploratory circuitry. So very ancient system. And it's happy when you have somewhere to go. That's the first thing. And then it's also happy when you're going there. And so if I'm on this side of the stage and I want to go over to that side of the stage, and I see that there's a nice clear pathway, I could just go straight down this line, then I look at that, and I'm actually a little happy. I'm not ecstatic. I mean, who the hell cares if I get to the other side of the stage, right? I mean, it's a small piece of my life, but it's not nothing. It's something, okay? And so I look at the pathway, and I think that's a good pathway, and I feel a little positive. And then if I move here, and then I see that little table right in the way between me and the other side of the stage, then I feel a little negative because I don't want an obstacle in my pathway. And so that's really how you're looking at the world, by the way. You don't see objects. It's not the right way to think about it. We don't see objects and then think about them and then evaluate them and then decide how to act on them. Or if we do it rarely and slowly and with a lot of thought. What we see instead are pathways with tools that will move us forward or obstacles. Right? And there's no obstacles here, and there's a nice flat road, and so great. Positive emotion. This is a task I can undertake. The sailing is clear. It's a good day. And then I'm here, and it's like, yeah, well, that's a little annoying. I get a little pang of disappointment, let's say, anxiety. Can I make it around that obstacle? I'm fairly confident. I've done this sort of thing before. So I can take the rough route, and I can, walk forward like this, and then I can do this great trick, which is just this, and then, I've circumvented the obstacle. Now, if I didn't know how to do the little bit of circumvention, then that would be a real problem, right? Because I couldn't get from point A to B, and that would screw up my plan. But I do have that particular skill set, so it's a minor disruption to the perceptual set that I'm using to organize the world. It's a minor bit of chaos, because that's what happens when your perceptual set, the structure that you're using to organize the world, the plan through which you're viewing the complexity of the world, reveals an inadequacy, then that destabilizes your emotions. So that's another thing to know. One thing you need to know is you need to be going somewhere, and there needs to be a pathway in order for you to feel good. The other thing to know is that if that plan is untenable or becomes destabilized,
then what happens is you become flooded with negative emotion. Frustration, disappointment, anger, primarily anxiety. But all of those things sort of intermingled. Anger maybe because you have to fight your way through the obstacle. Frustration because maybe you have to make a new plan. Disappointment because you put a bunch of work into the damn plan and it didn't work out. Anxiety because now there's too many choices in front of you. And so people don't like to have their plans disrupted. They don't like to have their plans disrupted. And the reason for that is that their plans are directly associated with their emotional perception of the world. And so, that's a good thing to know too. That's why, you know, what it is you've decided that you're going to go to like a Korean restaurant for dinner, and that's fine, and then it turns out that you can't, and maybe you have to go to a Greek restaurant, and it's like, who cares, right? Unless you hate Greek restaurants. Korean restaurant, that's pretty good. Greek restaurant, that's pretty good. You're still going to be annoyed that your plans changed. Well, why? Well, because it's annoying to have your plans changed. It disrupts the structure that you use to stabilize your perceptions of the world. And it throws you momentarily into a state of chaos. Not much. Now, how much chaos? This is interesting. We don't know, you know, like, let's say you wake up one morning and you have an ache in your side. It's like, well, you don't have an ache in your side. What does it mean that you have an ache in your side? Well, you don't know. Like, maybe it means you pulled a muscle, and like, who the hell cares? Maybe it means you have cancer, and like, you're going to be dead in 6 months. The whole range of possibility is there, you know, and some people will assume one thing, it's like, that's nothing, and some people will assume the other, and all of them will be right sometime. And so the question is, how do you calibrate something like that? And the answer is, well, we tend to guess at it. We guess at it temperamentally. So one way we guess at it is we have our set points for negative emotion. So it's neuroticism trait. Some people will be a lot more nervous about a small level anomaly than others. And maybe they'll go to the hospital first and they won't die. And then, or maybe they'll be freaking out all the time and they'll be a hypochondriac, right? So there's pros and cons about being nervous like that. The other person's very emotionally stable. They don't worry about much. They think, it's nothing. And then, you know, by the time they get to the hospital, it's too late. Hey, that's how the dice roll. That's one way that you guess. It's determined in large part genetically. Not completely, but in large part. Another part is your position in the hierarchy. You know, so the issue is, well, how safe are you in life? And the answer is, who knows? But one of the way you guess is, well, are you good at things? You know, because if you're good at things and a problem comes up, you can probably solve it. And then you might think, well, how do you know if you're good at things? And one answer might be, well, other people think you're good at things. Because you're really kind of comparing yourself to other people when you're thinking about whether or not you're good at things. And so if it turns out that you're in a hierarchy and you're fairly high in the hierarchy, indicating a certain degree of competence, then your nervous system, under the control of the serotonin system, dampens down your negative emotion. It says, look, you know, all things considered, you're probably pretty safe. And that's nice, but it also means you don't like having your position in the dominance hierarchy challenged at all. Because if you get tossed down the hierarchy, let's say you get fired, well, it wreaks havoc with your serotonergic function. It makes you defeated, like the defeated lobsters that I wrote about. And then all of a sudden, you're way more susceptible to negative emotion. And who wants that? And so that's why you don't even like to lose arguments. You know, you lose a little argument, it's like, whoop, down the dominance hierarchy a bit, up, emotions are a bit destabilized. It's no damn way, I'm right. And why? Because I want to keep my neurochemistry in check. And no wonder. Well, the thing is, sometimes it's better to learn than to insist upon being right, because learning works better for the future. But you get the point. There's this idea that philosophers have developed in the last 50 years called performative contradiction. It's like a lie. Normally, you think of a lie as you lie when you say something that you know not to be true. And there's different forms of lies. There's sins of commission, lies of commission, where you literally say something and you know it not to be true. And then there are lies of omission, where you have something to say and you don't. And classically, people have regarded sins of commission more seriously than sins of omission. But sins of omission, they're not nothing. And, you know, I've read
studies that purport to demonstrate that if you ask people when they're older, what they regret most in their life, it isn't the mistakes they've made, it's the opportunities that presented themselves to them that they never took, right? That's a sin of omission. I think it's an open question. Maybe your life would be long enough, even though it's short, maybe your life would be long enough if you took advantage of everything that came your way. Maybe you'd exhaust yourself in the pursuit of that opportunity so that you could be content with the finitude of your mortal existence. If you didn't avoid and hide things in the fog, let's say, that's rule number 3. Do not hide unwanted things in the fog. Your own future, all that opportunity. Do not do what you hate. You go to work and you hate it, right? You're forced to do things that you don't want to do, that grate against, not your lack of discipline, right? We have to get that straight, not your immaturity. You have to, if you're resentful, you got to ask yourself, are you just immature or are you being tyrannized? No, those are the questions. And the probability that you're immature is very high if you're resentful, but it's also, it's the case for everyone, right? It's like, have you fully grown up? It's highly improbable. And well, you know people, you know what they're like, you know yourself, that you're still 13 in some ways. And I can see this in my clinical clients often. It was so interesting watching them talk, because especially if they had been hurt at some point in their life, they would literally, I could see them transform right before my eyes. I saw one woman once who talked to me about a very traumatic experience she had. Her mother put her in a grocery cart, and it was on a hill, and she rolled down the hill in the bloody grocery cart, and it spilled her out, and she ended up in the hospital and under the care of a pretty damn psychopathic nurse. And it really tilted her towards paranoia for the rest of her life, right? She was so shocked, first of all, that she got hurt, and second of all, that when she went for help, she encountered someone malevolent who actually, what would you say, fed on her pain. She never recovered from that. And then when she was telling me the story, she was like a 55-year-old woman. She was 5. Like everything about her just shifted, like her tone of voice, the set of her face, the voice she used. You could just see that part of her had come to one crash and halt in the out-of-control shopping cart that hit the pavement hard when she was 5 years old. And this hate. There's this idea in the New Testament, it's a very tricky idea. There's one unforgivable sin. People have argued forever about what that is. Because the idea, that one of the ideas our culture is based on, is that if you've made mistakes in your life, but you admit to them, so that's to confess, let's say, and then you repent, which is to figure out what the hell you did wrong and decide to do better in the future. And that can be very hard if you did something really wrong, so it's not like it's an easy thing to do. It's difficult in proportion to the magnitude of your failure to aim, let's say. But that if you do that properly, no matter how far you've strayed, that you can be set back on the proper path, right? That you can be forgiven and that you can then move ahead. And we better hope that's true, because there isn't anybody anywhere who hasn't done many things that were pretty damn dark. And if it was all only the case that we were done when we made a mistake, then, the jig's up for everyone. And so you need justice, because you can't get away with everything or even anything, perhaps, but you need mercy too. And mercy is, the same. You apply that to your children as well. They make a mistake or multiple mistakes, and perhaps even more so when they're teenagers. And the basic rule is still, try to do better and you're still welcome, fundamentally. And that's a good rule. That's a really good rule. what would interfere with that process of redemption, let's say, and maybe that's your decision not to abide by the dictates of your own conscience. So you tell yourself, I shouldn't be doing this, whatever it happens to be. Maybe you don't find your job meaningful, and not that that's a simple problem. Or maybe you're really called upon to do things at work or in your family life, or just to save your good name that really do disturb you, and yet you do them anyway. And then you practice doing that. You make that into a habit, and everything you practice, that becomes you. This is true neurologically. If you repeat something over and over, if you practice it, you build the biological structures that make you an expert at that. And so if you're practicing violating your own conscience with a performative contradiction, this other form of lie, this willingness to act out things that run contrary to your own sense of morality, right? So you act out a lie. Well, then you become the embodiment of a lie. And, well, there's endless metaphorical speculation about the spirit of the lie, right? I mean, that's one of the characterizations of the great adversary of mankind, is the prince of lies. And you allow that to take up its residence within you because you're rationalizing doing what you hate, then you do that at your own peril. And if you get really good at that, maybe there's no way back. The danger of being an actor, is that you become the actor and then you lose you, obviously. You replace you with that falsehood, and that will make you bitter, to lose you in the service of a falsehood. And then, once you're bitter, then you're vengeful, and once you're vengeful, then you're, what's next? Fratricidal. That's Cain, by the way. And once you're fratricidal, the next step is homicidal, and the step past that is genocidal. And, you can walk down all those steps, and people have lots of times. And every one of us has something in us of all of that. That's for sure. And you don't want to practice that. Well, one of the things that I think can be really useful, and this is also a skill that will serve you well for the rest of your life, is to start using a schedule, like a Gmail calendar, and schedule in studying time, for example. Now, so I've got some thoughts about using a schedule. People often don't like schedules because it's like developing your own tyrant. It's, okay, well, here's a whole bunch of things I have to do tomorrow. That's my schedule, and I better stick with it, or I'm a bad person, I'm a failure. And that's not the right way to go about it, the scheduling. What you want to do with the schedule is design the day that you would like to have. Now, some of that's going to involve responsibilities that you have to live up to, or your life will get worse. Right? So, but I would say, if you're trying to start learning how to manage your school stress, is like, schedule in 10 minutes of homework. Maybe before you go to school in the morning, if you can get up. You probably can't, because teenagers have a hard time getting up in the morning. But start with 10 minutes. See if you can train yourself to sit down for 10 minutes after dinner, some regular time, and do 10 minutes of homework. And that's it. Put that in there as a goal. And then maybe if you've done your 10 minutes of homework, you can schedule in, 15 minutes of playing a video game if you want, some sort of reward. But start figuring out how to organize your day so that you get to do the things that you want to do, and you do some of the things that you have to do in a manner that you think you could actually do, in a manner that would be sustainable across time. And that, like, the part of your brain that makes you anxious is really unhappy if you don't have a plan. And so one of the fastest ways to start to deal with too much negative emotion, too much stress-related negative emotion, is to make a plan and to make it concrete. And so I would say, and a schedule is an unbelievably useful way of doing that. And you think, in your mind, why am I filling out this calendar for the week? Well, so I know what I'm doing, so that I'm not anxious, so that I'm doing things I want to do, so I have something to look forward to. and so that I'm doing things that I have to do so that my life doesn't go spiral downhill and make me more miserable and resentful and bitter. And so you can start to use a schedule as your friend, and like that'll take a year of practice to get good at. So if it doesn't work well in the first week, don't give up. Just keep doing it until you get yourself disciplined and they are able to stick more and more to your plans. And that will help you so much in your life, you just can't believe it. So what you want to do is chop up that overwhelming infinity into a set of manageable tasks. And you want to think, well, you know, some of those tasks might be like, well, maybe you could put some order into your room. You know, or maybe you could make your room a little bit more beautiful, or maybe you could think of one thing around the house that you could do that would actually be helpful. And you're doing that to improve your life. That's the point. You're not doing it because someone's shaking a stick at you and telling you that this is what you have to do if you're going to be a good person. That's not the point. And you also, with your schedule, you think, well, I'm going to design this schedule for someone I like. And that person that I'm designing the schedule for that I like is going to be me. And so it isn't the schedule of a slave master to a slave. It's a negotiated schedule that you arrange with yourself so that you can have a decent life. But it's a very powerful tool to have a calendar at your disposal. And if you can learn to use that young, just put a few things in it. Put in your classes, put in a few assignments, put in some things that you might want to do. Just start stupidly and badly, and you'll get good at it and assume you'll get good at it over about a year, and that'll change your life. Like if you learn to listen to people, if you decide that you're not going to say things that you know to be untrue, and if you learn how to schedule your time, your life will change for the better so much that you won't believe it, and that will keep happening more and more and more and more as you get older. So it's a great thing to start practicing if you could start practicing that when you're a teenager and you get that under control by the time you're 18, you'll be absolutely deadly. You'll be so far ahead of other people who don't do any of that you won't believe it, and you'll just continue to accrue benefits as a consequence. Well, the thing is that, or one of the things is that, you know, you are going to be putting up with other people's problems and troubles for the rest of your life. And what you want to do is live your life in a manner that makes all of that tolerable. And so I would say, with the scheduling and with the attempt to speak honestly, and with the development of goals that are valuable to you, you're going to be occupied enough with your own life and see enough of the quality of that life so that you'll be able to tolerate a fair bit of noise and stress coming at you from other directions. And I would also say that the more that you put yourself together in the manner that we've already discussed, the better other people will treat you, and the less unnecessary suffering and distress that you're going to encounter. And I would say, and I'll close with this, I would say to your viewers, don't underestimate the utility of getting your act together. Another thing you can do is, and this is like deciding that you're going to stop saying things that you know not to be true. The other thing is, you could decide to stop doing things that you notice make you weak. And it's a game that you're playing with yourself. It's like you're out with your friends, you do something maybe because you think it'll make you popular, and you notice that makes you feel kind of subordinate and weak, and think, aha, I shouldn't do that again. I don't know exactly what it is that I did wrong, but it made me feel weak. It made me feel like I was coming apart at the seams. It's not the thing I should repeat. So you try to do things that make you stronger. You try to say things that make your speech more true and accurate. You try to aim at things that you think are worth attaining, and you get yourself disciplined and in order, and that will do. There's nothing else you can do in your life that will be of more benefit to you and to other people simultaneously. And if you could start that when you're a kid, man, I tell you, you'll be so far ahead. You'll be so far ahead by the time you're 18 or 19 that it'll be like you're in a different universe.
Put yourself together. And then maybe if you put yourself together, you know how to do that. You know what's wrong with you, if you'll admit it. You know there's a few things you could like polish up a little bit that you might even be able to manage in your insufficient present condition. And so you might shine yourself up a little bit, and then your eyes will be a little more open, then you can shine yourself up a little bit more, and then maybe you could bring your family together instead of having them be the hateful, spiteful, neurotic, infighting batch that you're like doomed to spend Christmas with. So then you fix yourself up a little bit, and then you got to figure out, well, can you figure out how to make peace with your idiot brother? And probably not, because he's just as dumb as you, so how the hell are you going to manage that? And so then maybe you get somewhere that way, and your family's sort of functioning, and you find out, well, that kind of relieved a little bit of suffering, although it reduced the opportunities for spiteful revenge, and that's kind of a pain in the neck. And so then you get your family together a little bit, and you're a little clued in then, at least a bit, because you've done something difficult that's actually difficult. You're a little wiser, and so then maybe you could put a tentative finger out beyond the family and try to change some little thing without wrecking it. So, and that's the other message of the West. It's like, how do you overcome the suffering of life? And I'm not saying it's only the message of the West. How do you overcome the suffering of life? Is be a better person. That's how you do it. Well, that's hard. It takes responsibility. And I think, if you said to someone, you want to have a meaningful life? Everything you do matters. That's the definition of a meaningful life. But everything you do matters. You're going to have to carry that with you. Or do you want to just forget about the whole meaning thing, and then you don't have any responsibility, because who the hell cares? And you can wander through life doing whatever you want, gratifying impulsive desires for how useful that's going to be. And you're stuck in meaninglessness, but you don't have any responsibility. Which one do you want? Well, ask yourself, which one are you pursuing? And you'll find very rapidly that it isn't the majority of your soul that's pursuing the whole meaning thing, because, well, look what you have to do that. You have to take on the fact that life is suffering. You have to put yourself together in the face of that. Well, that's hard. Christ, it's amazing people can even do it. I'm stunned every day when I go outside, and it isn't a riot with everything burning. There's all these ruined people out there. They've got problems like you can't believe. Off they go to work and do things they don't even like, and look, the lights are on. It's a miracle, and we're so ungrateful. College students, the postmodern types, they're so ungrateful. They don't know that they're surrounded by just a bloody miracle. It's a miracle that all this stuff works, that all you crazy chimpanzees that don't know each other can sit in the same room for 2 hours sweltering away without tearing each other apart, because that's what chimps do. Anyways, so I got to the bottom of some things, at least as far as I can tell, so I told you what the bottom is, and then I got this idea about what you might do about it, which isn't my idea. It's an old idea. It's far older than Christianity. It's old. It's the oldest story of mankind. Get yourself together. Transcend your suffering. See if you can be some kind of hero. Make the suffering in the world less. Well, that's the way forward, as far as I can tell, if there is any way forward.
Live without it.
Assuming you want to get better, there's usually something you can figure out that would constitute a step towards some sort of concrete goal. And my presumption, it's a behavioral presumption fundamentally, is that small accruing gains that repeat are unbelievably powerful. You can tyrannize yourself into doing things, but I wouldn't recommend it. What I would recommend instead is that you ask yourself what you're willing to do. It's a really effective technique. It's like a meditative technique. So, for example, you can get up in the morning and you can think, well, I'd like to have a good day today, so I'd like to go to bed tonight without feeling guilty because I, didn't do some things I said I was going to do, and I'd like to have kind of an interesting day. So you've got to fulfill my responsibilities, and I want to, enjoy the day. Then you can ask yourself, well, what would I have to do in order for that to happen that I would do? And the probability, if you practice this for 3 or 4 days, is your brain will just tell you. It'll say, well, there's that piece of homework that you haven't done for like 3 weeks. You should knock that sucker off because it would only take you 10 minutes and you've been avoiding it and torturing yourself to death for 72 hours straight. And say, well, let's figure out what your aims are. You've got to have some aims, whatever they are. And they might say, well, I'm so depressed I don't have any aims. And then I say, well, pick the least objectionable of the aims and act it out for a while and see what happens. Because sometimes your emotional systems are so fouled up that you have to pretend. You have to act the thing out before you can start to believe it. life can be meaningful enough to justify its suffering. I thought, God, that's such a good idea. Because it's not optimistic exactly. You know, some people will tell you, well, you can be happy. It's like, those people are idiots. I'm telling you, they're idiots. There's going to be things that come along that flatten you so hard you won't believe it. And you're not happy then. And so if life is to be happy, well, in those situations, what are you doing? Why even live? But life isn't to be happy. If you're happy, you're bloody fortunate, and you should enjoy it. You should, because it's the grace of God, so to speak. People know when they're doing something meaningful. They can tell. So why the hell don't they do meaningful things all the time? It seems obvious. You could do it. I mean, it's hard, you know, because other people want you to do other things, and it's a struggle, but everything's a struggle. Oh, I get it. I see why. It took me about 10 years to figure this out. People have a choice. Choice number one, nothing you do means anything. Well, that's kind of a drag, right? It's meaninglessness of life and all that, existential angst. You know, that's kind of a pain. But the upside of nothing that you do is meaningful is you don't have to do anything. You've got no responsibility. Now, you have to suffer because things are meaningless, but that's a small price to pay. The alternative is everything you do matters. Really. If you make a mistake, it's a real mistake. If you betray someone, you tilt the world a little more sharply towards evil rather than good. It matters what you do. Well, if you buy that, then you can have a meaningful life. But there's no mucking around. It means responsibility. It means that the decisions you make are important. It means that when you do something wrong, it's wrong. Well, do you want that? We should make a very clear distinction here that often when people are embittered and resentful and feel like they're victims, it's because really awful things have happened to them. Now, not always, but often. And so then the question is, well, if you're in a situation and something really awful is happened to you or has happened to you, then, well, why shouldn't you feel like a victim? And is there a better alternative? And part of what you were trying to lay out in this part of the book is what those better alternatives are. So part of looking for that hero is to find out from someone else's example. In your case, it was your mother, but these other sources that you described of people who were in a sort of hell in an undeniable sense, but who chose in a very real way to make it as good as it could possibly be given the circumstances. And so they had to turn to sources of power, let's say, and strength and fortitude and resilience that weren't, in some sense, obviously associated with the catastrophe. I mean, in your mother's case, it's a pretty tragic situation. She's a young mother, she has young kids, now she has breast cancer, and she fights a losing battle over a period of 5 years. That's pretty bad. And then you have to ask yourself, given that that's obviously pretty bad, how is it even possible that someone could handle that with not only grace and courage, but the kind of grace and courage that leaves their children with an immovable sense of the ability to prevail in the face of the deepest adversity? I mean, that's really something. You said here, thousands have come before you and they did just fine. So quit your complaining. And it's not because you have nothing to complain about. That's not the case. It's that that's not the right approach. The fact is, and this is such an optimistic fact, as well as a judgment in some sense, the fact is that if someone else can do it, so can you. And that's something, right? If you're reading about the great heroes in history, people who are in these terrible situations, and you see someone rise to the occasion, and then you can say, well, that was a person who did that, and I'm a person, and so maybe I have that capacity too, even though I don't know how to approach it. And then some of the rest of your book, much of the rest of your book, I would say in some sense is a guide to help people figure out how they could approach that. One of the things you point out first is, well, notice who you admire. And then maybe try consciously practicing becoming like that.
And you know, people are very, 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 very tough. And it turns out that if you face things
It turns out that if you face things, that you can put up with a lot more than you think you can put up with, and you can do it without becoming corrupted. And she did recover quite fully, and much as a consequence of her own machinations, because she figured out what was wrong with her and then took the necessary steps to fix it, which is nothing short of a bloody miracle as far as I'm concerned. And anyways, part of the cat bit is, I actually start by talking about our dog, who actually died about a year ago, but he's still alive in the book. I let people know, because dog lovers love dogs, and if you love cats, then they think you don't like dogs, and then they don't like you. So I also point out at the beginning of the chapter that, if you want to pet a dog on the street, that's okay too, so you don't have to get up in arms about it. But the idea is that, you have to be alert when you're suffering. You have to be alert to the beauty in life, the unexpected beauty in life. And that's kind of what I was trying to get across with the idea of the cat. There's this cat that lives across the street from us called Ginger, and Ginger's a Siamese cat. And cats really aren't domesticated, technically speaking. They're still wild animals, but they kind of like people. God only knows why, but they do, And so Ginger will come wandering over, and our dog looks at her, but they're friends, and she rolls over on his back, and Seiko used to, nose her a bit, and then she'd kind of mosey over and let you pet her if she was feeling like it that day. And, you have to look for that little bit of sparkling crystal in the darkness when things are bad. You have to look and see where things are still beautiful and where there's still something that's sustaining. And, you narrow your time frame and you be grateful for what you have, and that can get you through some very dark times, and maybe even successfully if you're lucky. But even if unsuccessfully, then maybe it's only tragic and not absolute hell. And you can do that, in the worst situation. You can make it only tragic and not hell. And there's a big gap between tragedy and hell. There's nothing worse at a deathbed than to see the people there fighting. The death is bad enough, but you can take that, as terrible as it is, and make it into something that's absolutely unbearable. And maybe I think, and this is sort of what I closed the book with, this idea is that if we didn't all attempt to make terrible things even worse than they are, then maybe we could tolerate the terrible things that we have to put up with in order to exist, and maybe we could make the world into a better place, and it's what we should be doing and what we could be doing, because we don't have anything better to do. And that's what the book is about, and that's the end of 12 Rules for Life. And why beholdest thou the mote that is in thy brother's eye, but considerest not the beam that is in thine own eye? Or how will you say to thy brother, let me pull out the mote out of thine eye, and behold, a beam is in thine own eye? Well, you might be wondering what a beam is, and a mote is a dust speck, and a beam is a very large piece of lumber. And so the issue is not so much the blindness of others, even though there's as much blindness among others as there is for you. But the issue here, the advice here, the description here is, you should be concerned about what's interfering with your own vision first. And you should leave other people the hell alone in relationship to that. And so if your mode of being in the world is, if you would just act better, things would improve for me, or if you identify the evil and the catastrophe as something that's outside, that someone else needs to fix, or that someone else is responsible for, then you're not going to fix that. And you're going to remain blind to the things that you're doing and not doing that make things not go well. And so it's just better to think, all right, I'm probably blind in many, many ways. And maybe there are some ways that I could rectify that, because it's highly probable that you're blind in all sorts of ways. I mean, in fact, it's virtually certain. And so it's just more useful to think, how is it that I'm wrong in this situation? I'll tell you something that I learned to do when I was arguing with my wife, which happened quite frequently, because when you actually communicate with people, you find out that there's many things that you don't agree on. And that's because you're actually different creatures. And so if you're actually going to have a truthful conversation, then you're going to find out that
you don't see things the same way, and then you can either pretend that that's not the case and gloss over it and then end up in a 30-year silent war, or you can have the damn fight when you need to have it and see if you can straighten it out. So now and then we'd get in a situation where we were at loggerheads, we couldn't move, and you know, it would spiral up into hate speech, let's say. Because, yeah, everyone laughs because they know they manifest plenty of hate speech towards those they love. So one of the things we learned to do was, when we hit an impasse, was to separate and to go our own ways and to go sit and think, okay, look, we're at this unpleasant situation. We can't figure out how to move forward. I'd always think, of course it's her fault. Obviously it's her fault. At least 95%. But maybe there was something I did that contributed like 5% to it. And so I would sit and think and ask myself a question, which was, is there anything I did in the last 6 months that increased the probability that this impasse would manifest itself? And I'll tell you, you have no idea how fast your mind will generate an answer to a question like that, because there's undoubtedly some idiotic thing that you did, that you know, that you remember, that increased the probability that you're going to have your hands around the throat of the person that you love. And then you can go tell them that, and then you can have a conversation, especially if they do the same thing. Say, look, you know, here's how I'm an idiot in this situation. And the other person says, well, yeah, here's how I'm an idiot. And then you're two idiots, and then maybe you can have a conversation. So, thou hypocrite, first cast out the beam of out of thine own eye, and then shalt thou see clearly to cast out the mote of thy brother's eye. That's, hey, hard to argue with that. Ask, and it shall be given you. Seek, and ye shall find. Knock, and it shall be opened unto you. For everyone that asketh receiveth, and he that seeketh findeth, and to him that knocketh it shall be opened. That sounded pretty optimistic again. But again, I think it's a description of the structure of existential reality, and by which I mean, when I'm in my clinical practice and I observe, and this is also the case with my students, is, let's say, people's lives aren't what they would like them to be. And so then you ask, why? Well, forget about tragedy and catastrophe, because that's self-evident, and we're not going to discuss that. Although the degree to which you bring about your own tragedy is always indeterminate. But I would never say that every terrible thing that is visited on a person is something they deserved. I think that that's a very dangerous presupposition, especially because everyone gets sick and everyone dies. But one of the main reasons that people don't get what they want is because they don't actually figure out what it is. And the probability that you're going to get what would be good for you, let's say, which would even be better than what you want, right? Because, you know, you might be wrong about what you want easily. But maybe you could get what would really be good for you. Well, why don't you? Well, because you don't try. You don't think, okay, here's what I would like if I could have it. And I don't mean in a way that you manipulate the world to force it to deliver you goods for status or something like that. That isn't what I mean. I mean something like, imagine that you were taking care of yourself like you were someone you actually cared for. And then you thought, okay, I'm caring for this person. I would like things to go as well for them as possible. What would their life have to be like in order for that to be the case? Well, people don't do that. They don't sit down and think, all right, you know, let's figure it out. You've got a life. It's hard, obviously. It's like 3 years from now, you can have what you need. You've got to be careful about it. You can't have everything. You can have what would be good for you, but you have to figure out what it is, and then you have to aim at it. Well, my experience with people has been is, if they figure out what it is that would be good for them, and then they aim at it, then they get it. And it's strange because they don't it's a strange thing. It's not quite that simple because, you know, you may formulate an idea about what would be good for you, and then you take 10 steps towards that, and you find out that your formulation was a bit off, and so you have to reformulate your goal. You know, so you're kind of going like this as you move towards the goal. But a huge part of the reason that people fail is because they don't ever set up the criteria for success. And so since success is a very narrow line and very unlikely, the probability that you're going to stumble on it randomly is 0. And so there's a proposition here, and the proposition is, if you actually want something, you can have it. Now the question then would be, well, what do you mean by actually want? And the answer is that you reorient your life in every possible way to make the probability that that will occur as certain as possible. And that's a sacrificial idea, right? It's like, you don't get everything. Obviously. But maybe you can have what you need. And maybe all you have to do to get it is ask. But asking isn't a whim or today's wish. It's like, you have to be deadly serious about it. You have to think, okay, like, I'm taking stock of myself. And if I was going to live properly in the world, and I was going to set myself up such that being would justify itself in my estimation, and I don't mean as a harsh judge, exactly what is it that I would aim at? Well, one of the things I've found is that, in test of this theory, let's say, you could try this. This is a form of prayer, knocking. Sit on your bed one day and ask yourself, what remarkably stupid things am I doing on a regular basis to absolutely screw up my life? And if you actually ask that question, but you have to want to know the answer, right? Because that's actually what asking the question means. It doesn't mean just mouthing the words. It means you have to decide that you want to know. You'll figure that's out so fast it'll make your hair curl. It's as if Jung thought about this. He thought that people had two poles of consciousness, and one was the individual consciousness that we each identify with, and the other was something he called the self, and the self is you might think about it as the divine within. That's close enough approximation. It's the universal part of your consciousness. It's your conscience. That's another way of thinking about it, whatever your conscience is. But it's something that you can consult. It's like the Socratic daemon. Socrates said that the thing that made him different than everyone else in Greece was that he consulted his daemon, his genius. He asked himself how it was that he should conduct himself in the world, and then he did that, whatever it was. He didn't try to force a solution, he didn't try to force a solution selfishly. He asked, I'm going to manifest myself in the best possible manner in the world. I would like to do that. What would that be? Well, you're perfectly capable of thinking. God only knows how. You're perfectly capable of immense feats of imagination and dream and fantasy. God only knows how you do all of that. What would happen if you consulted yourself about the best possible outcome for you? You might get an answer. Well, that's what this proposition is. I don't know what the hell you should do with your life. I can help you figure it out, maybe. We can talk about it, but you are the person who has to decide if the things that you're aiming for, get you out of bed in the morning. And then you got to specify the transformation processes and start practicing them. And you have to understand that you're going to be bad at it, but it doesn't matter because bad's fine. Persistent is what you need to be. If you persist, with tiny improvements, if you persist, you win. It's direction that produces primary positive emotion. And so if you need positive emotion to move through life, which you do, because you can't even move without positive emotion, and also positive emotion is a good bulwark against terror and pain. If you need those things, then you need direction, you need a goal, you need a value structure. You let all that nonsense burn away. And you might say, well, I don't know what I should leave behind. And the answer to that is, that's a lie. All you have to do is ask yourself. You'll come up with a list instantly of 100 stupid things that you're doing that you could stop doing. Take on the consequences of error and learn from it. And then you win constantly, because even if something goes sideways, you think, there's something to be derived from this. When you're in the world and something objects to you, something that matters objects to you, then in the entire unrealized world is in that thing that objects. It's all tangled up inside it. That's why it's the great dragon of chaos. It's everything that's outside of your conceptual structure. And what is that? It's everything that lurks outside of your walled city. And it's manifested itself like the snake in the garden. And the easiest thing to do is say, I'm not having anything to do with that. But the problem with that is, well, you get your C- and you don't do anything about it. Maybe you're a little bitter and more resentful and your study habits get a little worse. So the next time you get like a D+, and then you collect a bunch of Fs, and then you stop going to school, and then you stop showering, right? Then you end up jumping off the bridge. And so that's how the dragon eats you when you don't pay attention to it. And so it's no bloody wonder that people avoid, you know. It's really no wonder that they avoid, because error messages contain within them the implicit world. Now, the upside of that is, well, they contain within them the implicit world. And the world isn't all negative. And so maybe you get your C-, and that's actually the best gift you ever got, because somebody finally took you and went, whack, you know, clue in. And so you take that apart and you think, oh, I don't know how to write. I don't know how to think. I've never read anything in my life. My study habits are abysmal, you know, like maybe I'm working at 2% efficiency, which it's like, to find that out is so optimistic. I mean, if you're barely hanging in there, but you're only working at 2%, you might imagine what you could have as a life if you're working at like 50%. So the C- can be the best gift you ever had, and that's the gold that the dragon hoards. That's exactly what that means. That doesn't prove that you're stupid. And now it implies that you might be stupid, but it doesn't, really, it does, and that's why you don't want to look at it. Maybe it implies that you're lazy, or implies that you're ignorant, or like it implies all sorts of terrible, but you don't want to leap to that, and that's sort of the proclamation of innocence before guilt. You are the thing that is, and you're the thing that becomes, and you should put the thing that becomes at a higher place than the thing that is. That means you also have to allow yourself to shake off those things about you that you might be pathologically attached to, habits and people for that matter, ways of thinking, all of those things. You have to allow yourself to shake those off, and that's more like a burning. That's why the phoenix is the symbol that it is, right? It's old and it deteriorates, it bursts into flame, and then it's reborn. It's like, well, do you want to be reborn? It's like, well, that's not the question. The question is, do you want to burst into flame? And the answer to that generally is no, but that's the wrong answer. The right answer is you let all that nonsense burn away. And so then you look at the micro routines. It's okay, well, I got a C- in this course. Maybe I should study for that course 15 minutes more a day for the next 3 months. And then you ask yourself, do you think you could do that? No, I'm too useless. Okay, how about 15 minutes every second day? You think you could do that? You put it in your schedule, like 15 minutes every second day in the morning. And that's, well, you think, well, what's wrong with me? Well, I'm not very good at managing my study schedule. That's not quite down here at the behavioral level, but it's pretty close, because what you can take an action. You can open up your schedule and you can say, well, I'll mark 15 minutes aside. Then you can practice doing that. It's pretty low level in the hierarchy. It means, well, you're still not a horrible person. You just got to polish up your work ethic. It's like, shut the hell up most of the time. But now and then you don't shut up because it's time to say something. You don't want to make unnecessary enemies, though. Well, you don't want to take yourself apart any more than is absolutely necessary. Develop some of the micro routines on the other side of the personality distribution. So if you're disagreeable as hell, maybe you could start learning how to do nice things for people. And that actually works, by the way. So if you take disagreeable people who are depressed and you get them doing nice things for other people, their depression tends to lift. But then by the same token, if you're agreeable, then you should practice doing some things for yourself and being more tough-minded in your negotiation. You know, you're extroverted. It's like, okay, man, learn to spend some time with yourself, right? You're low in openness. Well, try reading a book that's outside of your sphere of interest now and then. If you're conscientious, well, you should probably learn how to relax occasionally, and so forth. So you can, I think partly what you're doing as you're developing your personality is not moving the mean much, the average, where you're located, but you're extending the standard deviation so that you're a bigger bag of tricks than you were before. Life has got its rat's nest of miseries, and that's for sure. And maybe you could even make a categorical statement that life is mostly a rat's nest of misery. And you can make a pretty powerful argument for that. But then there's a counter question, which is, well, what if you tried not to make it any more miserable than it had to be, right? Then what would it be like? I would suspect that most of that misery would go away, because it's the unnecessary misery that really brings you down. It's like, well, if someone has cancer, it's like, that sucks. But it's not like you can say, if only we had done this differently, then that wouldn't have happened. But when someone's out like torturing you in a malevolent way, or maybe you're doing the same, you can always ask yourself, well, is this really necessary? Is this just like a useless add-on to the miseries of life? That's what disheartens people. And so even in your own life, if you aren't suffering from self-imposed misery, and you're only suffering from inescapable misery, maybe you could handle that, and even maybe without becoming irredeemably corrupt. So the goal would be, well, yeah, life is a rat's nest of miseries, and maybe it has no ultimate meaning. We could say that if we're feeling particularly pessimistic, but it still leaves one question open, which is, if you didn't do everything you could to make it worse, how good could you make it be? And the least answer is, well, it could be tragedy, but maybe not hell. I wouldn't consider myself either naive or particularly optimistic person. I don't think I'm either of those. But this is actually an idea, this is one of the only ideas that I've ever found that I really believe to be rock solid. I actually think that it's true. And it's very optimistic, because it says you can use your sense of meaning to calibrate your progress through life. But there's rules. You have to aim at the highest possible good that you can conceive. Now, and that's subject to update, because what the hell do you know? But you start by aiming at the star you can see rather than the dimmer one that you can't yet perceive. And then you decide that you're going to do that honestly, right? That's a big decision. So the first decision, I think, in some sense, is a decision of love. You're going to decide that being is worthwhile and that you're going to work for its betterment. And that's a decision that's based on love. And the second decision is based on truth. Having made that decision, you're going to play a straight game. Having made those two decisions, I think that you can allow your sense of meaning to calibrate your pathway. And then what's so interesting is that you hit a state that's as close to paradisal as you're going to hit right away, because being engaged like that, it's better to be engaged in the solution of a complex problem than not to have a problem at all. And that's no different than saying it's better for there to be being than non-being, because being is a problem. And so if you want to have no problems, then you have no being. And you could say, well, being is so miserable that maybe that's the route we should take. And fair enough, but maybe you can have your cake and eat it too. You can have the damn problem. It can be a problem worth solving, and you can be so engaged in solving the problem that it justifies the fact that the problem exists. And then you get to have the problem and the solution at the same time, and maybe that's better than not having the problem at all. And I believe that, because one of the things I have seen, and I've seen this being so interesting when I've been lecturing to people, especially more recently, and this is also manifested itself on YouTube. I'm talking to people a lot about responsibility, and it's young men in particular that seem to be responding to that. And I think that's partly because I think that young women, in some sense, have their responsibility map already laid out for them. It's also less voluntary in some sense for women, because they have more complicated problems to solve in the first part of their life, right? Because they have to get the family problem solved. But whatever. I've been talking in a very delineated manner about responsibility, which is a strange thing to sell to people, but responsibility is what gives your life meaning. And so then you might say, well, then take on ultimate responsibility. And what happens? You have an ultimately meaningful life. And then you might say, well, if your life is ultimately meaningful, doesn't matter if it's punctuated by tragedy or even predicated on tragedy. It's worth it. And I think that's true. And everything I've seen indicates to me that's true. Every time I get my clients to take on more responsibility, you know, and it isn't an injunction. You're a bad person, you should take on responsibility. It has nothing to do with that. You can define the damn responsibility. It isn't something that someone else should impose on you. It's not a matter of doing what you should do in some abstract manner. It's not that. It's the choice of what game you're going to play. And you know, you can play the game of the seeker, I would say, and if you play that game, then everyone wins. And it's the best game you can play. And so the answer, in some sense, to the tragedy of life, to the catastrophe of life, to the fall, is to adopt the responsibility of mortality that goes along with that, and to play that game maximally. And paradoxically, it's in the willingness to do that that the solution emerges. And I don't, you know, I have done my best with every single thing I've talked to you guys about. I have done my best to do what Dostoevsky does in his novels, which is I make a proposition and then I spend months or years trying to figure out if I can take the bloody thing apart, if there's something wrong with it, because I want to find out. I want to hit it with a hammer and see if it breaks. And what I've been trying to do is to tell you all the things that I've gathered, let's say, or laid out or articulated or discovered over the last 30 years that I have not been able to break with the biggest hammer that I could take to them. And I guess that's the fundamental one, is that I believe that the idea that lurks in these images, derived from very different cultures, it's the same idea. Life is suffering. Right. Indisputable. What do you do about that? You voluntarily accept it and then strive to overcome the suffering that's a consequence of that. And you do that for you, and you do that in a way that makes it better for other people. And then that works. And one question might be, well, how well does it work? And the answer is, the only way that you can find out is by trying it. That's it. That's the existential element of it. The proof is to be derived by the incarnation of the attitude in your own life. No one can tell you how it will work for you. It's the thing that your destiny is to discover that. And you have to make the decisions to begin with. It's like, because you can't do this without commitment. You have to commit to it first. That's the act of faith that Kierkegaard was so insistent upon. You have to say, I'm going to act as if being is good. I'm going to act as if truth is the pathway to enlightenment. I'm going to act as if I should pursue the deepest meaning possible in my life. And there's reasons to do none of those. They're real reasons. So it's really a decision. But you can't find out what the consequence of the decision is unless you make the decision. I think the same thing happens when you get married, by the way. Is that if you think you might leave, you're not married. And then you think, well, the marriage didn't succeed. It's like, well, maybe you were never married. Because the rule is, you don't get to leave. And there's a reason for that rule. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't situations where there should be exceptions made for that. That's not the point. The point is that there's some games you don't get to play unless you're all in. And the other thing that's so interesting about being alive is that you're all in. No matter what you do, you're all in. This is going to kill you. So I think you might as well play the most magnificent game you can while you're waiting. Because do you have anything better to do? Really? Why not pick the best thing possible that you could do? Why not do that? Maybe you could justify your wretched existence to yourself that way. I think you could. That's what it looks like. You know, people find such meaning in the responsibilities they adopt. It stops making them ask questions about what life is for. If you have a newborn child, for example, like, unless you're really in a bad way, psychotically depressed, or maybe your personality really needs some retooling, you stop thinking about anything but ensuring that that baby is doing well. And if someone comes along and asks you an existential question about your commitment to that, the right response is, why are you asking me such stupid questions when this is manifesting itself right in front of your eyes? Like, how blind can you be? That isn't a time for questions about the meaning of life. The answer is right in front of you. And if you can't see it, it's not because life has no meaning, it's because you're blind. I mean, that's what the image of the Virgin Mother and the child is all about. It's like, what's the answer to the meaning of life? Here's an answer. It's like, well, I'm going to criticize that. Well, go right ahead. You know, it's like what you're like a what do you call that? A termite gnawing on a temple. There's no utility in that sort of criticism. It's blindness. And it's the same thing with regards to the path of the hero. It's like it glistens in front of you and you can criticize it. It's like, fine. Put the cart before the horse and see how far you get. So I thought, to bring full closure to the class, I was trying to solve this terrible puzzle that confronted me and many other people about how it was that human beings got themselves in such a tangle about what they believed. Such a tangle that we were pointing the ultimate weapons of destruction at one another, which, by the way, we are still doing. And I thought, okay, well, I understand that. We need our belief systems. They orient us. And that means there will be conflict between belief systems, and that can be a catastrophe, and that's being played out everywhere, again, in very many ways. What's the solution to that? Well, one possibility is there's no solution. It's just mayhem all the way around. Could be the case. But it seemed to me, as I delved into it, that the proper solution to that was to live properly as an individual, because you're more powerful than you think. Way more powerful than you think. I mean, God only knows what you are in the final analysis. You're blind to your own weaknesses, but you're also blind to your own strengths. And so then I think, well, if you got your act together, it'd be better for you, and instantly it would be better for your family, assuming they wanted you to get your act together, and not everyone does, but, and then it would be better for the community. It's like, how far could you take that? If you stopped wasting time, and if you stopped lying, and if you oriented yourself to the highest possible good that you could conceive of, and you committed to that, how much good could you do? Well, I would say, why don't you find out? So that's what I think you should do. You should find out. You don't have anything better to do, and there's nothing in it, as far as I've been able to tell, there's nothing in it but good. So maybe you could sort yourself out so that you wanted nothing but the good, and then maybe you could help make that manifest in the world, and maybe we wouldn't have all these terrible problems then. At least we'd have fewer of them, and that would be a start. So it's the answer to the problem of humanity is the integrity of the individual. That's the answer. So, and states that are predicated on that realization are healthy. So, and states that aren't are doomed to stagnation and catastrophic collapse. And personalities that are predicated on self-tyranny and the tyranny of others are doomed to collapse. So, and then you think, well, what's the barrier? And the barrier is, are you willing to accept the responsibility? And part of the answer to that is, reduce the damn responsibility until it's tolerable. You don't have to fix everything at once. You could just start by fixing the things that you could fix. Or you could even do it more. You could do it with even less self-sacrifice. You could start by fixing only the things that you want to fix. God, you can get a massive way that way. So do it. See what happens. That's what you should have been taught in university right from the beginning. It's like, aim at the highest good. Tool yourself into something that can attain it. And go out there and manifest it in the world. And everything that comes your way will be a blessing. And so all you have to do is give up your resentment and your hatred. I know that's a hard thing to give up because you have plenty of reason for it. That's probably a good place to stop. So it was a pleasure.
Yeah, well, we're not animals in a zoo. Like we're not camels in a zoo. We're not herbivores, you know. And just because we have enough straw doesn't mean we're going to lose our unbelievable capacity for destructive creation. And we don't know how to harness that, you know. And I've been trying, I suppose, in some sense, to meet that desire for a call to adventure with what I'm writing and with my lectures, and to use responsibility in this moral domain as a battle that's of sufficient intensity to engage young people in particular property. It's like, get yourself together, see how difficult that is, see what you can do, put yourself together, stop doing the things you know to be wrong, and see what happens. Put yourself together. And there's been an unbelievable response to that. And I think it's harmless in some sense, or as harmless as such things can be, because it is focused. It's like, change you. Leave the other people alone. Or if you want to change them, maybe you can do it through example. You know, but they're not the problem. You have enough problems with yourself. It's like, well, what are you complaining about? You've got enough to eat. It's like, fair enough, you know, who wants to starve, right? And so it's even hard to fight against. Well, I should be grateful for that. And yes, you should, but it's not enough. And you think about where we came from, our ancestors, what they struggled against, and from the time we were from our animal forebears all the way up to where we are now, whatever we're made for, it's not Twinkies and TV. It's not willful blindness and the comfort that brings. It's not enough, and so we need this adventure, and that's something we're going to all have to contend with, because if we don't get the adventure right, then we'll get it wrong, and it'll lead us in terrible places. One of the things I've said that people have repeated many times, and that it's in memes, and you can buy it on, merchandise items and that sort of thing. A good man is a very dangerous man who has himself under control. And no one ever says that. So you say to young men, look, like, your job is to be as dangerous as you possibly can be in every possible direction, and to control that, right? Not to be harmless and slothful and contemptible even in your own eyes. And that way you get the power of the shadow. You don't have to dispense with the anger and the aggression. You can integrate it. And that's way better. I mean, I had a remarkable conversation with Jocko Willink. I felt that it was remarkable. It was very engrossing. And Willink, he's unlike me in many ways. I mean, he's a physical specimen of sort of unparalleled proportions to begin with. He's about 2 feet thick, and he's this military guy, highly disciplined, and also extraordinarily morally integrated. And he's an admirable person, because the danger is right there under the surface. But he has it rather than it having him. And we're uncomfortable with the idea that that's the proper route for socialization. We try to teach our children that only, cooperative games are acceptable. And they know in their hearts that that's a complete bloody lie. It's not technically sustainable. It's not even conceptually correct. I'm not saying I've solved it. I talk to Bjorn about this a lot. It's like, I love your message. Wouldn't it be wonderful to eradicate absolute poverty? And he does this great job technically of rank ordering global concerns, doing a cost-benefit analysis that's methodologically rigorous, and saying, look, we can devote money here. We'll get a 20-to-1 return, mostly in child nutrition, as it turns out. Couldn't we do an immense amount of good with targeted spending? And the answer is clearly yes. We could eradicate child poverty in the next 15 years. We probably will. We could do great things, but we don't know how to sell it. And that's a huge problem. I've never had more of a response from a crowd than when I draw a relationship between responsibility and meaning. Without fail, that brings the crowd to silence. And it's because that connection hasn't been made explicit sufficiently, I would say, is that we find meaning in responsibility. And there is a messianic call that's embedded in this. And you can translate that into get yourself together, see what you could become. And, much of Beyond Order is exactly that. It's push your limits, move beyond yourself, discipline yourself, but move beyond that discipline. Don't let that order constrain who you could be, because it's not a high enough order yet. And I would say, it looks like that is attractive to young people, and perhaps specifically to young men, but not only to young men, and not only to the young. So, well, that's a problem that we have to address is, we are doing a lot of things right, but it's not romantic enough. The clinical experience and my lecturing experience has been unbelievably positive in the main, and the clinical experience was positive because I was always on the side of the part of the person that was oriented towards their own health and improvement. That was part of our contractual pact. I'd often make that explicit. It's like, I'm not here for unconditional positive regard. I'm on the side of the part of you that wants everything to be better, and we're going to discover where that is, and we're going to work to facilitate it. And people loved that, and it was so gratifying to engage in that work. It was constantly positive. I worked with a huge variety of people, from people who had nothing, no gifts, and were just off the edges of the world, to people who were unbelievably talented and gifted, the whole gamut. And that was absolutely wonderful to see that range of people. And the lecturing has been the same way. Like the lecture tour I did was immensely positive, too much positive even. You wouldn't think that would be possible, but it is possible. And I'm very positively oriented towards human beings in the main, despite I think we're great, flawed and terribly, but no wonder. No wonder. I mean, the burden we bear is absolutely, it's absurd. The existentialists made much of that. We have an absurd existence. We're aware of our own mortality. God. And we're animals. We're aware of our own mortality. What a burden. And yet here we are. And much of the time we're not corrupt and horrible. It's a miracle. So, it's a word of encouragement. And that's what people are responding so positively to in a time where everyone is told this story that, human activity is all a struggle for power, and that we're fundamentally a destructive force, and that we should rein ourselves in. And I'm not selling that message. It's a word of encouragement. You could be more than you are, and wouldn't that be great for everyone, including you?
What emotion do you feel when you're going to approach someone you're very attracted to, and there's an extremely high probability that she's going to tell you to disappear? Right, exactly, absolutely, because it's a real judgment, right? We're going to see a movie called Crumb where you'll see this in great detail, but it's a real judgment. It's like the best judgment is, well, I don't mind your physical presence, but your genes should definitely not survive another generation. Right, and that's sort of generally translated into, I think we should just be friends. Right, and you can blow that off, and people do, and you have to, because it's part of being polite and civilized, but, let's make no mistake about it. There is no more fundamental judgment than that. So, paralysis, and there's no shortage of men, who are absolutely terrified of women. I've had many of them in my practice, I had one guy, he was so terrified of women he couldn't even talk to them on the phone. It's more common than you think. So, but it's generally manifested by men who no one cares about, so it's generally irrelevant. So, well, it's the case. It really is the case. I'm not kidding. They're low status men. They're people that are generally regarded as losers, and there isn't anybody who really gives a damn about what happens to them one way or another, and there's a lot more men in that category than there are women. Women are in all sorts of, social categories that cause them misery and distress, but that one seems to be predominantly male. One of the things I'm going to do when we talk about Freud is I'm going to show you this movie Crumb, which I just told you about, and it's a very rare thing because it shows you the world from the perspective of very intelligent male losers, and that's just not a perspective you ever see, because it's the winners that tell the stories about their life. It's like, who the hell cares about the life of a loser? But this movie is about a loser who became a winner, and almost as an act of revenge. And it's great. It's great examination of the Oedipal complex. Remarkable. Women select men. That makes them nature, because nature is what selects. And so, you can say, well, it's only symbolic that women are nature. It is, not in some sense, is the gatekeeper to reproductive success. And you can't get more like nature than that. In fact, it's the very definition of nature. So, as I said, there are lots of reasons why these symbolic representations are set up the way they are. Alright, so that's the great mother, nature. The queen, the matrix. The matrix is something from which all things form. Same root word as matter, mother, all the same root word. The matriarch, the container, the cornucopia, the object to be fertilized, the source of all things, the fecund, the pregnant. There are more parts of the associational network. The strange, the emotional, the foreigner, the place of return and rest. The deep, the valley, the cleft, the cave, hell, death, and the grave. The moon, ruler of the night and the mysterious dark, and matter and the earth. So those aren't necessarily associated with femininity, but they're typically associated with femininity from a symbolic perspective. So like generally, like a witch in a movie doesn't come riding out of the full bright sun at noon, right? That just doesn't happen because it doesn't make sense. It's a dark thing. And so if you saw that occurring in the light in a movie, you'd think, what the hell's going on here? That doesn't make sense. And the reason it doesn't make sense is because it violates the complex, the symbolic complex. So those are female denizens of the underworld and hell. very pleasant creatures. It's like Medusa with the head of snakes, you know. And if you ask, you know, why would a woman have a head of snakes in reference to a man? And that's really simple. I bet there are men here who know the answer to that. I don't know what you guys think about this, but I was pretty happy when I thought this up, and it took me a long time. So, if you think about the world in Darwinian terms, right, it's a struggle for survival and reproduction, which are basically the same thing. Survival is you, but reproduction is the survival of your genes. So it's a survival issue over very long spans of time. Okay, what do we call the selection mechanism? Right, natural selection, right? It's nature who does the selection. Okay, so let me tell you something that makes female humans different than female chimps. I mean, there's lots of things that do, but but here's an important one. If you look at which male in a chimp troop fathers most of the offspring, it's the dominant male. But the reason for that isn't because the female chimps sort of flock around the dominant male. Now that happens in other species, but it doesn't happen with chimps. What happens is the dominant male chases all the subordinate males away and will interfere with any sexual behavior they manifest. It'll chase them away. The females, though, are perfectly happy to mate with a subordinate male if they're in heat and they get the opportunity. So they go into heat, which is something that doesn't happen with female humans, and they really don't care who they mate with. Okay, female humans are much different than that. They're picky. So they're choosy. It's a big deal. It's a big deal that they're choosy. Women also seem to evaluate men for their fitness. Now, so, lots of men have no sexual partners and they have no children. That's not the case with women. Almost all women have one child or more. And it's a rare woman indeed who cannot find a sexual partner. Some of you undoubtedly have already experienced what it's like to be possessed by a particularly stupid idea. You know, so maybe you've grown out of one or two of the stupid ideas that possessed you, or maybe you're possessed by an attraction to someone you can't control, or you can't control your eating behavior, or you're a pushover when it comes to interpersonal interactions because you're too agreeable, or you fly off the handle and fight, and you know, none of this is really under your control. And so all of those things that manifest themselves not only in your behaviors but in your perceptions themselves, you know, they tend to take on embodied form and use you as the vehicle for their activity. So, you know, when you're thinking about something like anger, for example, think about how it works, because it's quite peculiar. What must someone generally do? How must someone generally act if you're going to be angry at them? They have to be irritating, right? You know, they have to provoke you in some way. Well, the mere fact that you perceive what they're doing as irritating or provoking doesn't ensure that anyone else would have thought about it, or that that's what they meant, or that that's what's happening. And my point is, it's very important to think about these complexes of ideas as subpersonalities, because otherwise you really don't get what they're like. If you're angry, if you have a proclivity towards anger, especially if it's an unthinking proclivity, anything that someone says might irritate you. And it isn't like they say something and you think about it and then you get irritated. It's like you perceive the person as irritating. You know, maybe it's just the way they hold their mouth or something. It can be very, very subtle. And you might say, well, it's not me, it's you. It's not that I'm irritated by you. It's that you're irritating. And that, you know, that's a very difficult thing to settle, because the reality is somewhere between the subjective and the objective, right? A lot of arguments that you'll have with people throughout your life are about exactly that. Are you irritating or am I oversensitive? It's like, well, you know, we're going to hash that out for a good long time before we figure it out. But the point is that if you're possessed by an emotional state or a motivational state or an idea or some kind of complex, you'll see the world through its eyes. And then the facts reveal themselves to you through the lens of that particular set of ideas. So it's a very frightening idea, because, you know, we like to think of ourselves as masters of our own house, which is completely clueless, because it's obvious if you watch yourself for like a month that you hardly ever do what you tell yourself to do, when you're liable to do all sorts of other things that you don't even want to do. You know, because you say, well, I'm going to go to the gym 3 times a week and I'm not going to drink, you know, and maybe there's this person I'm not going to associate with, and then, you know, you don't go to the gym and you find that person and you go out and drink with them, and you think, what the hell's going on, you know? But you're not the sort of person that will do what you say. And so, like, what sort of person are you? Well, that's a psychoanalytic question. It's a deep one, because you're a peculiar thing. And there's parts of you that are really, really, really old. And you know, the sort of naive you, the naive young you that you think of yourself as is like a little piece of flotsam in an ocean of complexity. And the ocean of complexity is you. And part of diving down into the depths is to start to understand what it means to be human. And like, whatever that means, it's the one thing you can say about it for sure is that it's bloody peculiar.
But the young men really need to hear this more, I think, is that you should be a monster. You know, because everyone says, well, you should be harmless, virtuous. You shouldn't do anyone any harm. You should sheath your competitive instinct. You shouldn't try to win. You know, you don't want to be too aggressive. You don't want to be too assertive. You want to take a back seat and all of that. It's like, no. Wrong. You should be a monster, an absolute monster, and then you should learn how to control it.
If you're harmless, you're not virtuous. You're just harmless. You're like a rabbit. A rabbit isn't virtuous. It just can't do anything except get eaten. It's not virtuous. If you're a monster and you don't act monstrously, then you're virtuous. But you also have to be a monster. Well, you see this all the time. Harry Potter's like that too. It's like he's flawed, he's hurt, he's got evil in him. He can talk to snakes, man. He breaks rules all the time. All the time. He's not obedient at all. But, you know, he has a good reason for breaking the rules. And if he couldn't break the rules, him and his little clique of rule-breaking, you know, troublemakers, if they didn't break the rules, they wouldn't attain the highest goal. So it's very peculiar, but it's a very, 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 very common mythological notion. You know, the hero has to be a monster, but a controlled monster. Batman is like that, you know. I mean, it's everywhere. It's the story you always hear. Someone who is incapable of cruelty is a higher moral being than someone who is capable of cruelty. And I would say, and this follows Jung as well, that that's incorrect, and it's dangerously incorrect, because if you are not capable of cruelty, you are absolutely a victim to anyone who is. And so part of the reason that people go watch anti-heroes and villains is because there's a part of them crying out for the incorporation of the monster within them, which is what gives them strength of character and self-respect, because it's impossible to respect yourself until you grow teeth. And if you grow teeth, then you realize that you're somewhat dangerous, or maybe somewhat seriously dangerous, and then you might be more willing to demand that you treat yourself with respect and other people do the same thing. And so that doesn't mean that being cruel is better than not being cruel. What it means is that being able to be cruel and then not being cruel is better than not being able to be cruel. Because in the first case, you're nothing but weak and naive. And in the second case, you're dangerous, but you have it under control. And you know, a lot of martial arts concentrate on exactly that as part of their philosophy of training. It's like, we're not training you to fight. We're training you to be peaceful and awake and avoid fights. But if you happen to have to get in one, and I guess the philosophy also is that if you're competent at fighting, that actually decreases the probability that you're going to have to fight, because when someone pushes you, you'll be able to respond with confidence, and with any luck, and this is certainly the case with bullies, with any luck, a reasonable show of confidence, which is very much equivalent to a show of dominance, is going to be enough to make the bully back off. And so the strength that you develop in your monstrousness is actually the best guarantee of peace. And that's partly why Jung believed that it was necessary for people to integrate their shadow. And he said that was a terrible thing for people to attempt, because the human shadow, which is all those things about yourself that you don't want to realize, reaches all the way to hell. And what he meant by that was, it's through an analysis of your own shadow that you can come to understand why other people are capable, and you as well, of the sorts of terrible atrocities that characterized, let's say, the 20th century. And without that understanding, there's no possibility of bringing it under control. When you study Nazi Germany, for example, or you study the Soviet Union, particularly under Stalin, and you're asking yourself, well, what are these perpetrators like? Forget about the victims, let's talk about the perpetrators. The answer is, they're just like you. And if you don't know that, that just means that you don't know anything about people, including yourself. And then it also means that you have to discover why they're just like you. And believe me, that's no picnic. So that's enough to traumatize people, and that's partly why they don't do it. And it's also partly why the path to enlightenment and wisdom is seldom trod upon, because if it was all a matter of following your bliss and doing what made you happy, then everyone in the world would be a paragon of wisdom, but it's not that at all. It's a matter of facing the thing you least want to face. If you're going to be a fighter, you have to want to win. And you have to want to hurt people. I mean, not for the sake of hurting them. That's what makes you different than an evil person. But you have to have that capacity. You have to develop that. And, you know, that's the step on the way to enlightenment, weirdly enough, because that isn't what people think.
People have been fed this diet of pablum, rights and impulsive freedom for so long. There's just an absolute starvation for the other side of the story. There are no rights, technically speaking, without responsibilities. And all we've had for 60 years is a dialogue about rights. Well, that leaves a hole on the other side of the story. And it's a hole that's in people's hearts, essentially. Because responsibility, well, perhaps that's not more important than rights. Like I said, they're part and parcel of the same formula. But it's in responsibility that most people find the meaning that sustains them through life. It's not in happiness. It's not in impulsive pleasure. Those things blow away at the first ill wind. But to adopt the responsibility for your own well-being and to try to put your family together and to try to serve your community and to try to seek for eternal truths and to live them, that's the sort of thing that can ground you in your life enough so that you can withstand the difficulty of life. And when you tell people that, especially when you include yourself in the audience, let's say, and you're not finger waving from above, then everyone knows that it's true. There's been this attempt to identify masculine competence and power, let's say, but mostly competence with tyranny, and that's very, very hard on young men. It's also hard on young women, for that matter, but it's very helpful for people to hear that they should make themselves competent and dangerous and take their proper place in the world, because it's the alternative to being weak. And weak is not good. The people who shoot up the high schools, they're weak. They're weak. And life is a very difficult process, and you're not prepared for it unless you have the capacity to be dangerous. That doesn't mean that you should be cruel. It doesn't mean any of that. There's a statement in the New Testament, the meek shall inherit the earth. But the meek isn't well translated. It means something more like, those who have swords and know how to use them but keep them sheathed will inherit the world. That's a way better way of thinking about it. You have to be powerful and formidable and then peaceful, in that order, right? And that's not the same as being naive and weak and harmless, which is what young men are being encouraged to be. It's like, that's a very bad idea. It's a very bad idea, because naive, weak, and harmless means that you can't withstand the tragedies of life. You can't bear any responsibility. You'll end up bitter. And when you get bitter, then you get dangerous. You don't treat adult men as if they're infants.
You most want to find will be found where you least want to look. There's this old story that's from King Arthur, and King Arthur has these knights, right? They all sit around a round table, which means they're roughly equal. That's what the round table means. And they're off to find the Holy Grail, and the Holy Grail is the most valuable object. That's what it means. So they're off to find the most valuable thing, but they don't know what it is, and they don't know where it is. But they know that there's a most valuable thing, so in some sense it's akin to them orienting themselves by the star. And they don't know where to look, and so what they decide is, they have the castle, and it's the middle of a forest, and so each knight decides to start looking for the Holy Grail by entering the forest at the point that looks darkest to him. And so what's the idea there? Well, imagine there are things that come easy to you, and that you're fond of pursuing, and that you're happy about pursuing. So you've found those and pursued them, and you've mastered them. So you know all that, but then there's another place that you don't want to go. And so you haven't gone there, and you haven't mastered it, and you're very small in comparison to it because you haven't mastered it, and so it has this monstrous aspect. If what you're doing isn't working, it's where you haven't gone that you need to go. And so I can give you another example of this. So let's say
You're an agreeable person. And so you don't like conflict and you won't stand up for yourself. And you regard anger and the proclivity to provoke and to engage in conflict as something that's positively terrible. It's not only that you're not good at it, it's actually that it's wrong. So that's where you have to go if you're going to learn how to stand up for yourself. And imagine that you're afraid. Maybe you have something like agoraphobia. So there's a whole bunch of things that you're afraid of, and you don't want to go there. But if you want to put yourself together, then that's exactly where you have to go. And so it's frequently the case that what you want to find is to be found where you least want to find it. And that idea is echoed in the prominent stories of dragons and gold. It's exactly the same idea. The dragon is this terrible thing. It's this terrible predatory thing that lives forever and is very, very wise. And it lives underground, and it'll kill you. It'll burn you up in a second. But it hoards gold. And so you have to go there into the dragon's lair if you're going to get the gold. And that's a representation of people's paradoxical relationship with reality. It's like you have to go out there and confront it in order to incorporate what it has to offer to you. But the probability that that's going to be intensely dangerous and push you right to the limit, first of all, those are actually the same thing. If it didn't push you to the limit, you wouldn't gain anything valuable from it. So you don't get one without the other. You don't get the gold without the dragon. That's a very strange, very, very strange idea. But it seems to be accurate. So all of that's lurking underneath this, in this imagery of the whale. Now, the whale, you can think of the story of Jonah. What happens with Jonah is that, roughly speaking, he's a prophet, and God tells him that he has to go to this city and straighten it out because it's veered off the path and it's heading towards doom. And Jonah thinks, I'm not going to that city to tell those people anything like that because they're not going to be very happy with me just showing up there and telling them, you know, everything they're doing wrong. And so he hops on a boat and tries to get out of there. And then God conjures up this huge storm and the boat is about to be swamped. And Jonah admits that it's actually his fault because God's upset with him because he got this direct command to go straighten out the city and he ran off. And so they're not happy about this, but they throw Jonah overboard and the sea's calm and great fish comes up, a whale, and swallows him. And then he's down in the fish for 3 days and it throws him up on the dry land. And then he's learned his lesson by that time and he goes off to pursue his proper destiny. So that's echoed in this story as well, that if you don't follow the pathway that you're supposed to follow, the seas will become stormy for you, and something will come up and pull you down, and you'll be in a terrible place for some length of time till you learn your lesson. And if you're lucky, you'll get spit back up on shore, and then you can go do what you should do. Well, I mean, that's not a lesson that anybody needs to have interpreted. I think everybody understands that. Part of spiritual development is to recognize the satanic tendencies that characterize you, and to fully wrestle with them and to integrate them. That's the thing. It's not so much to cast them away, it's to transmute them. You know, and you can see the difference between people who've done that and people who haven't, at least to some degree, because people who haven't integrated the shadow at all are naive. And you can tell that when you look at them, and you can tell that when you talk to them. And because they're naive, they're often resentful as well because they get taken advantage of. And someone who's integrated that more, they're dangerous in the martial arts sort of way, which is they're dangerous, but they don't have to use it because their presence radiates implicit potential for havoc, and that's really necessary. It's one of the things that gives people self-respect.
If you're being required to do things that make you weak and ashamed, then stop. Don't do them. Like one of the things I learned from Solzhenitsyn and Frankl was that systems go terribly out of control when people don't stop them when they're going mildly out of control. You know, and you might say, I should just keep my goddamn head down and shut up. It's like, maybe you should. Like, that's not bad advice. You know, you don't want to make unnecessary enemies, and you don't need any more trouble than you need. But you got to ask yourself on a day-to-day basis, what makes you think you're not selling your soul? You know, and there's so much foolishness going on in the mid-level bureaucratic world now. That's where all the tyranny seems to be focused. And the reason that it multiplies is because sensible people say nothing when they should say something. And what's so strange about that is that there are way more sensible people than people who aren't sensible. They're just not as noisy. So what you'll turn out if, like, you know, so let's say something's bugging the hell out of you at work. Well, then you have to prepare to find another job. That's the first thing you have to do. I don't think that you should find another job, but you should prepare to find another job. And if possible, you should prepare to find a better job. Because if you can't tell someone to go to hell, then you can't negotiate with them. And if they've got you over a barrel, then you can't say anything. So you gotta set yourself up so you've got some mobility. And actually, that's a really good principle in your life, period. You should set yourself up so that you have a lateral move at hand. And then you should find out, well, are there things at work that are disturbing my soul? You know, and you find that out. First of all, you ask yourself, okay, I'm disturbed at work. Okay, I'm probably weak and deceitful and useless and lazy. You might as well start with that. And then you talk to some people, like your wife, your friends, your co-workers, and find out, are you stupid, deceitful, and lazy? Or is there something not so good going on at work? And so if you can then eliminate your own personal pathology as a cause of your dissatisfaction, then maybe there's something rotten in the state of Denmark. And maybe you should say something about it before the whole goddamn thing collapses, because that can happen. It can happen in companies a lot faster than people ever think. You know, and you may find that, well, first of all, you may find if you say something, well, first of all, that's an adventure, that's for sure. That's a bloody adventure. And you have to do it carefully. And you have to be prepared for it. But it might be the best thing that ever happened to you. And the other thing is, if you're careful about it, you get your words right. Like, and this is strategic battle, right? It's not something you wander into carelessly. Then you may find that there's lots of people who feel exactly the same way you do, and that you've actually cottoned on to something. You're a canary in a coal mine, and not just some like psychopathic mouthpiece. So you got to ask yourself when you go and do what you do, like, is this making you stronger? Is this making you weaker? And if it's making you weaker, then you got to ask yourself, do you really want to be weaker? Because the weaker you get, the more you're tyrannized. And then worse than that, like, the weaker you get, the more bitter you get. And the more you'll work towards terrible things, the more you'll snap at your wife, the more you'll kick your kids, you know. Like, it's no joke to be tyrannized at work. And so I would say you have an ethical responsibility as a citizen to forthrightly confront creeping tyranny no matter where it occurs. And part of what we're learning, I would say, from these stories, if we're learning anything at all, is that if you're aimed at the good, which is a question you really got to ask yourself, you know, if you're genuinely aimed at the good, then take heart, because you're a lot stronger than you think.
We've met some of your fans, and we got the impression they were all male fans, the ones that we talked to, and that they were struggling with their manhood, and that you give them this message that it's okay to be a man.
It's not okay. It's necessary. What the hell are we going to do without men? You look around the city here, you see all these buildings go up. These men, they're doing impossible things. They're under the streets, working on the sewers. They're up on the power lines in the storms and the rain. They're keeping this impossible infrastructure functioning, this thing that works in a miraculous manner. They work themselves to death, and often literally. And the gratitude for that is sorely lacking, especially among the people who should be most grateful. You see university professors, especially of the social justice bent, who are among the most protected and privileged people that the world has ever produced. They take everything they have for granted, failing to understand entirely that there's a massive infrastructure of unbelievably hardworking, solidly laboring, working class men breaking themselves in half on a regular basis, making sure that everything that always breaks works. And so a little gratitude for that is in order. And it's very useful to tell everyone, not just men, that they have an important role to play, a necessary role, and that if they
act properly and honestly and forthrightly, that they can put their lives together and they can help their families and they can make their communities better, and that's not toxic masculinity, that appalling phrase. It's what keeps the world going round. If we had any sense, we'd understand that, instead of doing everything at every possible moment to label what we have in the West as oppressive and patriarchal and fundamentally predicated on power, of all the insane propositions.
My audiences are often composed mostly of men between, say, 20 and 35. Not exactly young, but young enough. And they're desperate for a discussion about responsibility and fair play and noble being and working properly in the world, and the idea, and to hear the idea that their lives actually matter, that if they straighten themselves up and fly right, that they'll have a beneficial effect on themselves and their family and the community, and that the world is starving for that. And for them as individuals, not for them as a group, but for each of them as individuals. So, yeah, it breaks me up. Every time the topic comes up, it breaks me up, because it's so damn sad. And we're so stupid. We're alienating young men. We're telling them that they're patriarchal oppressors and denizens of rape culture and you know, tyrants in waiting, and we fail to discriminate between their competence and their tyranny. And it's awful. It's so destructive. It's so unnecessary, and it's so sad. And so whenever I think about it, especially because of all that I've seen of it, it makes me sad, like deeply. It's so sad. So that's an interesting thing. Well, so let's say you go over your past with a fine-tooth comb and you decide you're going to take responsibility for everything that you did that was wrong and everything that you failed to do that you could have done that was right. It's like, does that change the world? It's like, depends on how thoroughly you do it. You might say it changes the world like nothing else possibly can. And I think that that's actually right. You have to allow yourself a certain latitude for error. And that's a useful thing to know too. One of the things I tell people when they're trying to develop a vision for their life or an implementable plan is make a bad plan. Like, make the best one you can, but don't get obsessive about it. It's like, make a plan, implement it. You'll figure out when you implement it why it's stupid. Exactly. And then you can fix it a little bit.